Tonight we're uncovering the hidden history of the Iron Throne and everyone who claimed it. There is plenty to unpack tonight, but I'll keep the narration slow and steady so you can still ease into sleep. Thank you to those of you who've been joining us consistently. If you're falling asleep with us tonight, let me know in the comments how many nights in a row you've been here. And if this is your first night, just comment night 1. Now back to the video. Deep in the heart of the Red Keep, in the cavernous Great Hall of King's Landing, there sits a seat unlike any other in the known world. It is not a chair of cushioned velvet, polished marble, or carved oak. It is a towering, twisted mountain of black metal, sharp edges, and jagged barbs. This is the Iron Throne, the physical manifestation of supreme authority over the 7 kingdoms, a seat that has cost tens of thousands of lives to establish, defend, and claim. To the people of Westeros, it is more than just a place where a monarch sits. It is a metonym for the state itself, a symbol of ultimate power that demands absolute submission. The story of this terrifying monument begins nearly 300 years before the fall of the Targaryen dynasty, with a man who looked across the narrow sea and saw a fractured continent ripe for unification. Aegon I Targaryen, known to history as Aegon the Conqueror, did not merely wish to rule. He wished to forge a completely new world order. Alongside his sister wives, Visenya and Rhaenys, and their 3 immense dragons, Aegon swept across the kingdoms, shattering ancient dynasties and forcing proud kings to bend the knee. When the conquest was complete, and the lords of Westeros had surrendered their weapons, Aegon did not discard the blades of his defeated foes. Instead, he gathered them. Legends whispered among the small folk claim that the throne was forged from 1,000 swords, beaten together by the hammers of 100 blacksmiths. The historical reality, preserved in the dusty scrolls of the Citadel, suggests a far more modest but no less terrifying truth. The number was likely closer to about 200 blades, yet their transformation was nothing short of miraculous. These surrendered swords were not melted down in a conventional forge. They were piled together and subjected to the unimaginable heat of dragon fire, breathed from the maw of Balerion the Black Dread, the largest and most fearsome dragon ever to cross the sea from Valyria. Under Balerion's black flames, the steel of proud knights and ancient kings melted, fused, and warped, cooled into a grotesque, asymmetrical mass of metal that still retained the sharp edges and points of the weapons that formed it. He believed that a king should never sit easily, that the act of ruling should be as hazardous and demanding as the conquest that won the realm. The seat is a physical warning to anyone who dares to rest upon it. Its steps are steep and uneven, its arms are jagged, and its back is a wall of pointed blades. To sit upon the Iron Throne is to invite injury. A single moment of weakness, a careless shift of weight, or a lapse in focus can result in a deep, painful cut. Over the centuries, the High Septons and Maesters would whisper that the throne itself could judge those who sat upon it, rejecting rulers who were weak, cruel, or unfit. When a monarch bled from its blades, the court watched in hushed silence, reading the wounds as dark omens of a troubled reign. For nearly 3 centuries, this dangerous seat remained the ultimate prize in a continuous game of political intrigue, betrayal, and catastrophic war. The dynasty Aegon established was built on the premise of absolute power, but that power was constantly challenged. From the early reigns of the Conqueror's descendants to the devastating civil war known as the Dance of the Dragons, where Rhaenyra and Aegon II tore the realm apart for the right to sit upon the metal seat, the throne has been a magnet for ambition and tragedy. It survived the madness of Aerys II and the brutal coup of Robert Baratheon, serving as a silent, cold witness to the rise and fall of empires. But to truly understand the weight of that silence, you have to stand in the shadow of the throne itself. It is not a single object, but a landscape of murderous intent. A towering asymmetrical monument that curves and climbs like a frozen avalanche of blades, rising almost to the ceiling of the Great Hall. This is not a seat designed for comfort. It is a fortress of menace, built to intimidate every single soul who lays eyes upon it. From the lowliest servant sweeping the floors, to the proudest lord come to bend the knee. The swords are not neatly arranged, they jut out at every conceivable angle. The steps are steep and uneven, forcing anyone who ascends to climb almost on all fours, a deliberate posture of submission. Once at the top, the seat offers no respite. There is no cushion, no armrest wide enough to relax upon. The back of the chair is a wall of jagged edges, promising a deep slice to anyone who dares to lean back. Aegon the Conqueror was not a tyrant who reveled in cruelty without purpose. He was a strategist, and every curve of this throne was a tactic. This tactic turned the throne into a metonym. In the political language of Westeros, the Iron Throne is the kingdom. To hold the chair is to hold the continent. Every war, every marriage pact, every whispered conspiracy in the corners of the Red Keep all trace their purpose back to this singular object. Seizing it was the ultimate goal. Defending it was the lifelong obsession of every king and queen who managed to claim it. But claiming it was only the beginning of the struggle. The psychological impact of the throne's design cannot be overstated. It forces the ruler to sit forward, always on the edge of their seat, quite literally. To slouch is to bleed. To appear weak is to invite a dagger. The monarch sits in a state of constant, visible alertness. The court reads the monarch's posture, their pauses, their cuts. When Aerys II, the Mad King, began to cut himself on the throne before Robert's rebellion, the court did not just see a king bleeding, but they saw the throne rejecting him. It was a sign, a dark omen that the realm itself was rejecting its king. This leads us to one of the most persistent legends surrounding the throne, the myth of the 1,000 swords. The bards sing of a pile of 1,000 blades, beaten and fused into one massive whole. The reality, recorded by the meticulous maesters of the Citadel, is far more practical and far more symbolic. The throne was likely forged from roughly 200 blades. But these were not just any swords. They were the swords of the defeated lords. Each blade represented a conquered kingdom, a broken army, a forced oath of fealty. The pile was set upon not with hammer and tongs, but with the black fire of Balerion the Black Dread. Under that dragon's breath, the steel softened, twisted, and solidified into the distorted, asymmetrical shape we know today. It was not mass that made it terrifying, it was the meaning. Imagine entering the Great Hall for the first time. The light is dim, filtering through high windows. The torches cast shifting shadows. Your footsteps echo on the cold stone. And there, across the vast expanse of the hall, sits a mountain of metal, gleaming dully with the memory of dragonfire. It is a presence. It dominates the room. You are not just looking at a chair. You are staring into the frozen culmination of the entire Targaryen conquest. The power of it is suffocating. For 300 years, this dangerous seat remained the ultimate prize. It survived civil wars like the Dance of the Dragons, where Rhaenyra and Aegon II tore the realm apart just to touch its jagged surface. It survived the madness of Aerys and the siege of Robert Baratheon. It sat unchanged, a silent, cold witness, as the blood of kings and queens dripped down its black iron steps. It is a monument not just to power, but to the violence required to hold it. To understand why anyone would suffer for such a seat, we have to look at the fire that forged it, and the very first claim pressed against its cold steel. The throne of Aegon the Conqueror was only the beginning of a story that would span generations, a story built entirely on the question of who had the right to rule. The towering monument of steel we left behind in the previous chapter is not merely a seat of power, it is a fossilized declaration of total victory. The Iron Throne was never inevitable. Before the Red Keep existed, before there was a city called King's Landing, there was a singular vision of unification forged through absolute military supremacy, and at the heart of that vision was a fire so intense it could reshape the history of a continent. Aegon Targaryen was a dragon lord from the fallen empire of Valyria. His people had used dragons as instruments of political will for centuries. When he looked westward across the narrow sea, he saw a fractured map of 7 squabbling kingdoms, bleeding each other dry over borders and ancient feuds. His solution was not marriage pacts or trade agreements. His solution was overwhelming force. The Field of Fire saw 4,000 men burn alive in a single afternoon. The walls of Harrenhal melted like wax. Torrhen Stark knelt without swinging a sword. Aegon did not simply conquer these lands. He shattered the old order completely. He ended the age of petty kings. But conquest is not the same as rulership. To hold the continent together, Aegon needed a seal that could never be broken, a permanent mark of submission that every lord, from the Wall to the Sea of Dawn, would recognize when they entered his hall. He ordered the swords of his defeated enemies gathered. These were not ordinary blades taken from fallen soldiers. These were the ancestral weapons of the great houses, the swords of the kings who knelt. Aegon did not take trophies to hang on a wall. He took their identity and melted it down to create something entirely new. But there was a problem with this ambition. No forge on earth could fuse Valyrian steel into an ordinary structure. No blacksmith could work 1,000 surrendered blades into a single object without shattering them. Only one force in the known world was powerful enough to do what Aegon needed. Balerion the Black Dread was a creature from an older, more terrible world. His fire was not merely hot. It was a force of geological violence, a weapon capable of turning stone into liquid sand. When Balerion breathed his flame upon the pile of surrendered steel, the blades did not simply melt. They glowed white, then fused together. They writhed and twisted in the heat. The throne was not built by masons. It was forged by a living creature of immense power, right in the heart of the sprawling camp that would one day be named King's Landing. The result was a mess of jagged edges, rippled pools of cooled steel, and broken crossguards jutting out at every angle. It is a monument to raw, unrefined power. It looks like a frozen explosion of violence, trapped in a single shape. Aegon deliberately made the throne impossible to sit upon comfortably. There is an old legend that says he stated a king should never sit easy. Whether the words are his or not, the design of the chair speaks for itself. The Iron Throne is a permanent, terrifying visual warning. It cuts the king who occupies it as often as it supports him. A careless ruler can bleed on his own seat of power. Every lord who entered the throne room was forced to stare at the physical evidence of their subjugation. Those swords on the walls were their swords, or the swords of their fathers, or the swords of their former allies. The message did not need to be spoken aloud. It was written in twisted steel. This is what happens to those who oppose the dragon. The dynasty did not rule through divine right alone. It ruled through the memory of the Black Dread's flame, and that flame was always ready to be unleashed again. But for all its terrifying power, the Iron Throne is an incomplete work of art. If you look at the chair that ruled the continent, there is a glaring gap in its history. Dawn. Aegon conquered 6 of the 7 kingdoms. The salty spears of Dawn never bent the knee. Rhaenys Targaryen and her dragon Meraxes died in the Red Mountains of Dawn. The Dornish fought a guerrilla war that the dragons could not win. Because Dawn remained unconquered, the swords of the Dornish lords are not a part of the Iron Throne. This is a massive, symbolic hole in the claim of absolute supremacy. The throne that was supposed to represent a unified Westeros was missing a crucial component. Every Targaryen king and queen who sat upon it knew this secret. The seat they ruled from was a symbol of their greatest failure, as much as their greatest triumph. For most of the dynasty's history, the Iron Throne ruled the continent, but it had never fully mastered Dawn. The shattered, twisted monument of Aegon's ambition always had a crack in its facade. The fire of the Black Dread gave Westeros a throne, but the throne itself could not hold the realm together by fear alone. The seat of absolute power became a target for every ambitious soul in the dynasty. The cracks in its creation story were just the first signs of the fractures that would tear the family apart from within. The Targaryens had built a monument to conquest, but they had to learn to live with the ghosts that sat beside them on the throne. The fire of Balerion the Black Dread that melted the swords of the conquered was a force of absolute creation, but a kingdom forged in that flame requires more than its creator to survive. Aegon the Conqueror understood this deeply. From the moment the Iron Throne cooled into its jagged form, he did not sit upon it alone. He ruled alongside his two sister wives, Rhaenys and Visenya Targaryen, forming a triad of power that defined the very foundation of the Targaryen dynasty. The Iron Throne was Aegon's seat, but it was never exclusively his. From the earliest days of the conquest, Rhaenys and Visenya were as much its masters as their brother. They held court from that twisted summit, hearing petitions, issuing decrees, and passing judgment upon the lords of the Seven Kingdoms. For a continent raised under the Andalic tradition of male primogeniture, this was a radical reshaping of power itself. The sight of the two queens seated upon the throne established the precedent of female authority within the early Targaryen state. Their word was law, their will was enforced by dragonfire and steel. Their claim to rule was presented not as a regency or a mere symbolic gesture, but as an equal and fundamental element of the monarchy. This was not a ceremonial arrangement. The practical division of their administrative duties became the engine that made the conquest sustainable. Governing a continent is an impossible task for a single mind, and the three of them proved that the throne required more than one ruler to govern effectively. Visenya took command of the fleets and the castles. She managed the raw military logistics of the kingdom, the training of garrisons, and the enforcement of the king's peace across the newly subdued lands. She was the iron hand of the crown, pragmatic and unforgiving. Rhaenys managed the crown's relationship with the High Septon, the great houses, and the intricate social contract of the realm. She was the diplomat, the conciliator, the one who charmed submission where dragonfire could not reach. Aegon held the grand strategy, the final judgment, and the public face of the monarchy. The three of them together formed a complete sovereign, a single crown worn by three heads. This perfectly balanced machine of state broke in dawn. Rhaenys was the soul of the Targaryen project. She was the element that softened the absolute terror of three dragons into the legitimacy of a ruling dynasty. In the 10th year after the conquest, she took her dragon Meraxes to Dorne to press the royal claim. At Hellholt, a Dornish scorpion bolt found Meraxes in the eye. The dragon fell from the sky, and Rhaenys died with it. The tragic death of Rhaenys in Dorne did more than end a single life. It ripped the soul out of the Targaryen reign. The triad of power was shattered, and in its place, the political resolve of the remaining monarchs was hardened into something cold and unyielding. Aegon's grief was not a fleeting emotion. It settled into the bones of the dynasty. But it was Visenya who channeled that loss into absolute purpose. The Dornish had killed their sister. The generous peace terms that Rhaenys had championed were withdrawn. The Dragon's Wrath, a campaign of fire and blood unlike the initial conquest, was unleashed upon Dorne. It was a war designed not for tribute, not for bending the knee, but for annihilation. The conciliatory heart of the realm had died in the sands of Dorne. What remained was the stern hand of Visenya and the scarred wrath of Aegon. With the loss of Rhaenys, the nature of Targaryen rule shifted permanently. The division of administrative duties that had maintained the peace now fell to only two people, and the character of the court veered sharply toward Visenya's stern pragmatism. The delicate social balance of the Triad was gone. The conciliatory approach to ruling was replaced by a deeper suspicion of the great houses, and a greater reliance on fear as a governing principle. The Iron Throne became a lonelier seat. The jagged edges that Rhaenys had once navigated with charm now served only to wound those who came too close. When Aegon finally passed from the world, the throne did not pass to a unified trio. It passed to a single heir. Aenys, Rhaenys' son, inherited the crown, But he inherited none of the raw power of his father, and none of the iron discipline of his aunt. The carefully constructed governance of the Triad had collapsed, leaving a single fragile line to hold the Iron Throne alone. The seeds of the first great crisis had already taken root in the ashes of the dragon's wrath, waiting for the moment when the throne would test its next claimant. The Triad of Power, the three-headed dragon made manifest in Aegon, Rhaenys and Visenya, had forged a realm that bent to the will of House Targaryen. Their rule was absolute, grounded in the memory of the Field of Fire, the authority of the Iron Throne, and the unquestionable might of their living dragons. But a dynasty built by an extraordinary generation carries within it the seeds of its own first trial, the moment the extraordinary becomes merely ordinary. Aegon the Conqueror died in the 37th year of his reign, a reign that had reshaped the map of Westeros. His death was not in battle, but in the quiet passage of time, leaving a void that could not be filled by legacy alone. His successor was Aenys, his son by Rhaenys. Aenys was a gentle soul, a scholar, a dreamer. He was born of a union that the faith deemed an abomination, and he carried that weight not as a defiance, but as a quiet shame. Where Aegon had been a conqueror, Aenys was an administrator, a man who sought to be loved rather than feared. In a realm held together by dragonfire and the memory of absolute force, a king who desired affection was a liability. The Iron Throne, jagged and unforgiving, is a test. Aenys failed that test almost immediately. He lacked the instinct to spill blood, to project the quiet menace that made the Targaryens seem more than mortal. The faith militant had never accepted the Targaryen tradition of incestuous marriage. While the dragons lived, the most devout held their tongues. But with a gentle king on the throne, the faith saw its opportunity. The faith militant began to reform. They preached that the Targaryens were abominations, slavers from a foreign land who broke the sacred laws of the gods. The incestuous rulers on the Iron Throne were not kings chosen by the gods, but monsters who had seized power through violence, made the fatal error of trying to compromise. He sought appeasement. He granted the faith permission to rearm. To the faith, this was not a sign of piety, it was a sign of weakness. The faith militant did not lay down their arms, they sharpened them. They turned on the crown. Rhaenys' failure to project strength from the throne led directly to a massive civil uprising. The Riverlands burned. The Reach burned. Lords who had bowed to Aegon now questioned the legitimacy of his son. The capital itself grew dangerous. The flight of the royal family from King's Landing was the final humiliation. Aeneas, his wife Alyssa, and his children escaped by sea to the safety of Dragonstone. The Iron Throne was left behind, an empty monument in an empty hall. The moment proved that the throne is only as strong as the person sitting on it. Aegon had made it unassailable. Aenys made it fragile. The dynasty was not broken, but the first crack had appeared. Aenys did not survive the shame of his exile. He died on Dragonstone, a broken king. The realm was in open revolt. The Targaryen dynasty faced its first existential crisis. The gentle era had passed. The crown was weak. The throne was empty. And into that vacuum, a completely different kind of king would have to rise. The dynasty was about to learn what it meant to rule without mercy. The song of Aenys was a song of failure. The song of what came next was a song of fire. Enter Maegor, the second son of the Conqueror, born of Visenya, and forged in the shadow of his mother's dark ambitions. If it was the gentle summer rain, Maegor was the devastating winter storm. He did not wait for the lords of Westeros to offer him the crown. Guided by Visenya, he returned from exile in Pentos and claimed his birthright with the ultimate symbol of Targaryen supremacy, Balerion the Black Dread, the largest of the dragons that had crossed the narrow sea. With the great beast beneath him, Maegor did not seek the love of his subjects. He demanded their absolute submission. The new king understood that a throne built on dragonfire could not be maintained by diplomacy. He met the rebellion of the faith militant, not with offers of peace, but with a fury that shocked the realm. In the streets of King's Landing, Maegor faced the warrior's sons in a trial of 7. It was a brutal, bloody spectacle that left Maegor the sole survivor, clinging to life but victorious. When he awoke from his injuries, his vengeance was swift and total. He rode to the Sept of Remembrance, where thousands of the faith militant had gathered, and bathed the holy structure in dragonfire, burning them alive in a terrifying display of royal wrath. For 6 years, Maegor ruled through terror. He completed the construction of the Red Keep, a massive fortress designed to withstand any siege, only to execute every mason, builder, and craftsman who had worked on it, so that its secret passages would remain his alone. He fought his own nephew, Aegon the Uncrowned, in the skies over the God's Eye, slaying the young prince and his dragon Quicksilver without a shred of remorse. Yet, a reign built entirely on fear is a house built on sand. Maegor's cruelty eventually united the realm against him. One by one, his allies slipped away, leaving him isolated in the massive fortress he had built. In the 48th year after Aegon's conquest, Maegor was found dead on the Iron Throne, his wrists slashed by the very blades that made up his seat. The cruel king was gone, leaving behind a scarred and broken realm. But the message of his reign was clear. The dragon would not be tamed, and the Iron Throne would belong only to those strong enough to seize it and ruthless enough to keep it. The kingdom of Aenys Targaryen had been a realm of sickly compromise, a court where the crown invited its own humiliation. By the time Aenys died in the year 42 after the conquest, the Iron Throne had become a target rather than a seat of authority. The faith militant had risen in open defiance of the incestuous customs of the Dragon Lords. The lords of the realm were sharpening their swords, testing the mettle of a dynasty that had, in a single generation, lost the terrifying momentum of its founder. Aenys left 2 children. His eldest son, Aegon, was named king, and he is remembered in history as Aegon the Uncrowned. He was young, no older than 19, and his claim was immediately challenged by the one person who had no respect for the weak traditions of inheritance. Maegor Targaryen was the second son of Aegon the Conqueror, born of Queen Visenya. While Aenys was gentle and scholarly, Maegor was forged from the same fire as his mother. He was a warrior, a man of immense strength and merciless temperament. He had been passed over in the succession because the lords of Westeros feared him. But Visenya had not raised a son who would accept exile quietly. When Aenys died, Maegor returned from Pentos. He landed at King's Landing with Balerion the Black Dread, the same dragon that had melted the swords of Aegon's enemies into the Iron Throne itself. The city did not resist. The gates opened. Queen Visenya herself placed the crown of the Conqueror upon her son's head. Maegor Targaryen had violently seized the Iron Throne from his nephew, and the realm held its breath. But Aegon the Uncrowned would not yield. He had the loyalty of many lords. He had a dragon of his own, a beautiful silver queen named Quicksilver, and he had the anger of a young man who had been robbed of his birthright. The 2 forces met in the Riverlands, on the shores of the God's Eye. The battle beneath the God's Eye was not a battle of men, it was a battle of dragons. Quicksilver was a fraction of the size of Balerion, a swift, graceful creature, but no match for the Black Dread. Balerion took to the sky, and the fight was over in moments. The great black dragon caught Quicksilver in his jaws, tearing her from the sky. Aegon the Uncrowned fell with his dragon, his body lost in the lake below. Maegor had won the throne through fire and blood, and his victory was absolute, but it was also a curse. He had killed the grandson of Aegon, the Conqueror. He had killed the rightful king. He had made himself a usurper in the eyes of every lord who valued honour and law, and Maegor knew, with a certainty that ate at him like a cancer, that the realm would never forgive him. This paranoia shaped his reign from the very beginning. Maegor looked at the Aegon fort, the wooden encampment on the high hill, and saw vulnerability. He needed a castle that could withstand a siege. He needed a castle that could withstand an army of the faithful. He needed a castle that could withstand betrayal from within. He commissioned the Red Keep, a fortress of solid red stone, a castle that would take nearly 10 years to build and cost the treasury of the realm a fortune. But the Red Keep was not simply about defense. It was about secrecy. Maegor had hidden passages built into the walls, secret staircases that spiraled through the towers, tunnels that ran beneath the castle. These secret passages were designed to protect the usurper from his own subjects. He could walk unseen from his bedchamber to the throne room. He could spy on his own council. He could disappear when assassins came in the night. Maegor was building a cage for himself, a magnificent cage of red stone where he could rule, but only as a prisoner of his own fear. The Faith of the Seven had already declared war on the Targaryen dynasty. Maegor's polygamy, his marriages to multiple women, was a direct challenge to their doctrine. The High Septon called him an abomination. The Faith Militant, the armed orders of the Church, rose in numbers not seen since the Age of Heroes. The warriors' sons and the poor fellows took up arms against the dragon. Maegor responded with the full fury of House Targaryen. The brutal suppression of the Faith Militant was a war unlike any Westeros had seen. Maegor led his armies personally. He rode Balerion into battle. He burned their septs and their castles. He executed the Grand Maester for conspiring against him. He offered a bounty on the heads of the warriors' sons. When the High Septon refused to bend, Maegor had him arrested. The High Septon died in a black cell beneath the Red Keep. But Maegor was not satisfied. He appointed a new High Septon, one who would do his bidding. The old orders of the faith were shattered. They were scattered, broken, and driven into hiding. And then, once the Red Keep was finished, Maegor demonstrated the full depth of his cruelty. The secret passages were a liability if anyone else knew of their existence. So Maegor ordered the builders, the stonemasons, the architects, every man who had worked on the hidden tunnels, to be gathered into the Great Hall. He thanked them for their service, and then he had them beheaded, one by one, their bodies dumped in the very pits they had dug. The secret of the Red Keep died with them. The castle was a fortress of ghosts, haunted by the screams of the men who built it. Maegor had protected his secrets, but he had created a legacy of such profound horror that his name became a curse. The realm bled under Maegor's rule. He was a tyrant and a butcher. The lords who had once supported him began to abandon him. His own wives died under mysterious circumstances. He was wounded in a trial by combat, slowly dying of an infected wound. When his nephew Jaehaerys, a boy of 14, gathered an army to challenge him, the realm rose in support. The lords of the great houses turned their cloaks. The Targaryen dynasty itself seemed to reject Maegor. In his final days, Maegor retreated to the Red Keep. He locked himself in the throne room. The servants heard him speaking to himself, arguing with ghosts. The guards refused to enter. For 6 days and 6 nights, the king sat alone upon the Iron Throne. On the 7th day, the door was forced open. Maegor was dead. He had died on the very throne he had spilled so much blood to claim. The story passed down through the ages is that he was found impaled on one of its jagged blades, his body pierced by the swords of his enemies. Some say it was suicide, a final bitter refusal to surrender. Some say the throne itself killed him, rejecting the usurper. Some say it was the silent work of his own guards, a quiet assassination disguised as an accident. The mystery was never solved, and perhaps it was never meant to be solved. The Iron Throne had claimed another victim. It was a seat that did not forgive, and it did not forget. With Maegor dead, the crown passed to Jaehaerys, the son of Aenys, the rightful heir who had been denied for so long. The realm needed peace. It needed a king who could heal. The Iron Throne, still sharp as the day it was forged, awaited its conciliator. Maegor the Cruel was dead upon the throne he had stolen. His blood, dried into the cracks between the melted blades, was a grim reminder of the violence that had defined his reign. The Red Keep was finished, but the realm it was meant to govern was fractured beyond measure. Into this battered kingdom stepped a boy of 14 years. Jaehaerys, first of his name, ascending the Iron Throne not as a conqueror, but as a healer. He inherited no treasury, no standing army, and the trust of the lords of Westeros had been shattered by his uncle's brutality. The Iron Throne itself was a symbol of pain, of tyranny. Jaehaerys knew it had to become something else. His greatest challenge was the faith of the Seven. The conflict over Targaryen customs had destroyed Aenys and defined Maegor. Jaehaerys chose diplomacy. He rode to Oldtown and sat with the High Septon. He did not demand, he proposed. The doctrine of exceptionalism was the result. The Targaryens, being the blood of the dragon, were not bound by the laws of common men. Their traditions were outside the purview of the faith. The High Septon agreed. The faith militant was disbanded. The warriors' sons laid down their swords. For the first time in a generation, the crown and the faith were at peace. With peace secured, Jaehaerys turned to building a kingdom that could last. He commanded the construction of the King's Road, a great stone road that would connect the wall to Storm's End, tying the realm together with an artery of stone. But his most powerful tool was not stone, it was law. He standardized the laws of the Seven Kingdoms. He created a unified code. He settled disputes. He sat the Iron Throne not as a general leading armies, but as a judge listening to petitioners. The throne became a seat of supreme judicial arbitration. The crown's authority was no longer based on fear of dragonfire. It was based on trust in the king's justice. Jaehaerys reigned for 55 years. He outlived his sons. He outlived his queen. He was called the Conciliator, the Old King, the Wise. Under him, the Iron Throne was never more stable, never more respected. But the problem of succession, the eternal flaw of every dynasty, haunted his final years. He called a great council at Harrenhal in the year 101 after the conquest to decide the matter of his heir. The decision made there, the precedent set, would define the future of the throne. The path of law and stability that Jaehaerys had built found itself on the edge of a precipice. The seed of the next great war was scattered in the very peace he had cultivated. At Harrenhal, more than 1,000 lords gathered to cast their votes. The choice lay between two primary claimants: Prince Viserys, the eldest male descendant of the old king through the male line, and Lyonor Velaryon, whose claim came through his mother, Princess Rhaenys. Rhaenys was the daughter of Jaehaerys' eldest deceased son, but she had been passed over before. Now the lords of Westeros were asked to decide if the crown could ever descend through a woman. By a vast margin, the lords chose Viserys. In doing so, they established an informal law, a precedent that would shadow the dynasty for centuries. The male line must always take precedence over the female line. When the old king finally closed his eyes in the year 103, Viserys ascended the throne as a beloved ruler. Viserys I inherited a golden age. The treasury was full, the realm was at peace, and the dragons of House Targaryen had never been more numerous or more formidable. It was a time of grand feasts, tournaments, and unmatched splendor. Yet, beneath the gilded surface of his court, the foundation of the realm was cracking. Viserys was a good man, but he was a weak king, eager to please everyone and desperately avoiding conflict. His first wife, Amma Arryn, died in childbed, leaving him with only one surviving child, Princess Rhaenyra. Desperate to secure his succession and prevent his volatile brother Daemon from seizing power, Viserys did the unthinkable. He bypassed the very precedent that had put him on the throne. He named Rhaenyra his official heir and forced the lords of Westeros to swear oaths of fealty to her. But the peace did not last. Viserys remarried, choosing Alicent of House Hightower, the daughter of his hand. Queen Alicent bore him sons, chief among them Prince Aegon. According to the precedent of the Great Council of 101, Aegon was the rightful heir, but Viserys refused to alter his decree. Rhaenyra remained his chosen successor. The court split into two heavily armed camps. On one side stood the Blacks, those loyal to Princess Rhaenyra and her claim. On the other stood the Greens, backing Queen Alicent and her son Aegon. The tension simmered for years, a slow-burning fuse winding its way through the Red Keep. Viserys chose to blind himself to the hatred growing between his wife and his daughter, believing that a king's decree alone could hold the realm together. When Viserys finally died in his sleep, the illusion of peace shattered instantly. The Greens moved in secret, hiding the king's death until they could secure the city and crown Aegon II. When word reached Dragonstone, Rhaenyra declared herself queen. The tragedy of the Dance of the Dragons had begun, a catastrophic civil war that would pit brother against sister, dragon against dragon, and wash the realm in fire and blood. The Conciliator had healed a broken realm. He had codified its laws and given it 55 years of peace. But a king's final and most treacherous duty is not the ruling, but the leaving. And the leaving of Jaehaerys I would undo much of the good he had built. The old king had outlived his primary male heirs, Aemon, Balon, 2 sons, 2 heirs, both taken by cruel fortune before their father's time. This left the succession to the Iron Throne not a line, but a maze. Standing at the gates of this maze were 2 children of the dragon, Viserys Targaryen, the son of Balon, and Lyonor Velaryon, the son of Rhaenys. The question was put to the realm. It was a question no king had dared ask so formally before. To break the deadlock, Jaehaerys summoned a great council. 14 days of debate. The Great Hall of Harrenhal, a monstrous skeleton of basalt and fire-scarred stone, echoed with arguments of the greatest lords of Westeros. Over 1,000 lords came. The sprawling, cursed castle played host to an election. Lord Corlys Velaryon spoke for his son, Lyonor, holding up the example of Dornish succession, the wealth of House Velaryon, the blood of the dragon. The supporters of Prince Viserys spoke of tradition, of the precedents of the Targaryen dynasty itself, and the simple stability of a male ruler. When the votes were tallied by the Grand Maester, the result was an earthquake. Viserys carried the day with 20 votes for every 1 vote cast for Lyonor. The decision was clear. The Iron Throne would not pass to a woman, nor through a woman, so long as a direct male descendant of the Conqueror remained. This was the ruling. This was the precedent set by the Great Council of 101. The old king died peacefully not long after. His reign was over. The reign of Viserys I began smoothly. The lords went home. The transition was the picture of stability. But the peace brought by the Great Council was a false peace. It had not settled the question of succession with law. It had settled it with a vote. A vote can be undone. A precedent can be broken. King Viserys I was crowned. He was a good man, but he was a man weak in the face of his own heart. He grieved deeply for his first wife, Ama Arryn, who died in childbirth. His only living child from that marriage was a daughter, Rhaenyra. He swore to her, before the realm, that she would be his heir. He then remarried, as a king must, to Alicent Tower, and with Alicent he fathered sons. A daughter cannot inherit if a son is born, the precedent of the Great Council seemed to say, but this was Viserys' throne. He had not been chosen by law, but by preference, and his preference was for his daughter to rule. The Great Council of 101 was supposed to be the end of the argument. Instead, it was the very first shot of a war that had not yet begun. The council had drawn a line in the sand. King Viserys erased that line with the ink of his own decree. The lords who had voted for stability and clear male succession were the very lords who now had to decide if they would follow the king's word or the vote of their fathers. The seeds of the Dance of the Dragons were not planted in the heated passions of a usurper, nor the cruelty of a tyrant. They were planted in the calm deliberation of a council and nurtured by the quiet love of a father. The Iron Throne was settled by the many, then unsettled by the one. The war that followed would take everything. Let's sit with that. The Great Council of Harrenhal was the first and last of its kind. It was a grand experiment in the politics of a united Westeros. It was meant to be a final answer. Instead, it was the question that would not die. The reign of Viserys I was a long summer, but the leaves were already beginning to fall. A throne built from swords will always draw more swords to defend it. As the years of the young century marched on, the court at King's Landing split into two distinct camps, like ice forming on opposite shores of a narrowing river. On one side stood the Princess of Dragonstone, Rhaenyra, the designated heir, surrounded by those who held to their oaths and the king's absolute decree. On the other side stood Queen Alicent Hightower, her father Otto, the hand of the king, and a growing faction of lords who looked upon the king's eldest son, Aegon, as the rightful successor by right of ancient custom and the precedent of the Great Council. They called them the Blacks and the Greens. It began with the colour of their gowns at a great tourney, but it soon became the colour of their banners, the colour of their loyalties, and eventually the colour of the blood they would spill. King Viserys chose to blind himself to the rift widening beneath his feet. He wanted only peace in his household, a quiet life of feasts, model building, and the comfortable illusion that love could conquer law. When his brother, Prince Daemon, the rogue prince, wed Rhaenyra, the threat to the succession only grew more potent. Daemon was a man of fire and steel, a warrior who wielded Dark Sister with a lethal grace, and a man who had no patience for the delicate sensibilities of the Hightowers. With every passing year, the tension mounted. The children of Rhaenyra and the children of Alicent grew up not as cousins, but as rivals, sharing a hatred that was nurtured in the training yards and whispered in the corridors of the Red Keep. An eye was lost in a brawl on Driftmark, a debt of blood that would never be forgotten. The dragons themselves seemed to feel the coming storm, their roars growing louder, their tempers shorter, as they nested in the dragon pit. When Viserys finally closed his eyes for the last time, the peace of the realm died with him. The king was cold in his bed, but his death was kept a secret for days. Behind closed doors, the small council met in the dead of night, not to mourn their sovereign, but to steal his crown. The hand of the king and the queen acted with ruthless speed. The crown of the conqueror was placed upon the head of Aegon II, while far away on Dragonstone, Rhaenyra remained ignorant of her father's passing and her own betrayal. The stage was set. The dragons were ready to fly. The realm would soon learn that when brothers fight brothers and sisters fight sisters, the only true victor is death. The Great Council of 101 had made its choice. Viserys Targaryen, first of his name, would inherit the Iron Throne. Jaehaerys, the Conciliator, passed from this world just barely into the new century, leaving the crown to the man the lords had selected. The new king ascended slowly, deliberately, inheriting a realm that had known peace for decades. Viserys I was not his grandfather. Where Jaehaerys had been a builder of roads and a maker of laws, Viserys was a caretaker. He did not wish to expand the realm or risk its stability. He wished to enjoy it. And for nearly 20 years, the peace held. His reign became characterized by endless feast days, magnificent tournaments, and a mounting court intrigue that was, in the early days, hidden by polite smiles and the clinking of silver goblets. The realm enjoyed an extended summer, and the king was determined to enjoy every moment of it. But peace is not the same as strength. The king had no male heir from his first wife, Aemma Arryn. She had given him a daughter, Rhaenyra, but the sons she carried never survived. Tragedy struck in 105. Aemma died in a brutal childbirth, and the son she bore, Balon, died with her. Viserys was left a widower and a grieving king, facing the terrifying question of succession. His brother Daemon was ambitious and reckless, a man the lords did not trust. In the depths of this grief, Viserys made a fateful decision. He passed over his brother and named his daughter, Rhaenyra, as his official heir to the Iron Throne. It was a radical choice, a departure from the precedent of the Great Council and the traditions of the Andals. But Targaryen law, if it could be called law, honoured the will of the king. Viserys called the lords of the realm to the Red Keep and made them swear oaths to Rhaenyra. They knelt, they spoke the words, and for a time the succession seemed settled. The king needed a new wife. His hand, Otto Hightower, pushed forward his daughter Alicent. She was young, clever, and beautiful. The marriage was made, and soon a new family grew in the shadow of Rhaenyra's claim. Queen Alicent gave Viserys sons, Aegon, Emond, Darren. A deep tension settled over the court. The division was slow, but it was absolute. On one side was the Princess Rhaenyra, the heir, supported by the powerful Sea Lords of Driftmark and the fierce loyalty of the Crown Lands. On the other side was Queen Alicent and her father, Otto Hightower. This faction, which would come to be called the Greens for the colours worn at a great corny, advocated for the rights of Viserys' eldest son, Aegon. They whispered in the corridors of the Red Keep that the king's will was a mistake, that the realm would never accept a queen. The king refused to address the growing schism. He believed that if he simply refused to acknowledge the conflict, it would vanish. He was a man of peace, but his peace was a fragile illusion. As the years passed, the rot in the court was mirrored by the slow decay of the king's own health. A wasting sickness took hold of Viserys. It crept through his body, eating away at his flesh, taking first his fingers, then his toes, then the strength of his legs. He spent his days soaking in warm baths, numbing his pain with milk of the poppy. The throne room grew quiet. The king grew distant. This physical deterioration was a perfect reflection of the political rot in the realm. The court was not a place of unity. It was a powder keg, and everyone held a lit candle. Rhaenyra, sensing the shifting winds, withdrew to Dragonstone. She built her own court, her own council, her own faction, the Blacks. The Greens fortified their control over the Red Keep itself. The king lay in his bed, dreaming of a peaceful realm that no longer existed. Viserys I reigned for 26 years. He was the last king of the peace, the final ruler to hold the Iron Throne without a major war. But it was a fragile peace, an illusion built on a single man's will to ignore the truth. He could not ignore his own body forever. In the year 129, the king who loved peace finally passed away in his bed. The rot that had consumed his body had finally stilled his heart. The realm did not have to wait long. The succession he had built, the oaths, the promises, the chosen heir, was cast aside almost before his body was cold. The Greens moved in shadows to place their Aegon upon the throne. The Blacks rallied their dragons and their banners. The quiet rot of the court exploded into open war. The Iron Throne had never truly belonged to any single ruler, but now it would become prize in a war that would decide the very future of the dynasty. The great and terrible conflict they call the Dance of the Dragons was about to begin. The realm of Westeros held its breath. King Viserys I, the Lord of the Seven Kingdoms, the Conciliator's grandson, had faded into a shell of his former self. His reign, which had once been characterized by feast days and tournaments, had become a slow closing of a door. The mounting court intrigue, the unhealed rift between his queen and his heir, had worn him down to nothing but a whisper of a king. And now the door had shut. Viserys died in his sleep in the Maiden Vault, his hand resting in the hand of his queen, Alicent. But the story that left his deathbed was a lie. The king's passing was the most dangerous secret in the Red Keep. Queen Alicent Hightower knew this. She did not announce the death. Instead, she closed the doors. She sealed the room. The death of Viserys I was kept secret from the public for days, while the Greens consolidate power. This was not a moment of grief. It was the first move in a silent war. She summoned her father, Sir Otto Hightower, the Hand of the King. She summoned Sir Criston Cole, the Lord Commander of the Kingsguard. They met in the dead of night, and they made their plan. The small council chamber saw no torchlight for a week, but decisions were made in that darkness, decisions that would burn the realm to ash. During this time, the wheels of the state were greased for a new king. The lords of King's Landing were summoned one by one to the Red Keep. They were told the king was resting, that he could not be disturbed by any matter of state, and then they were presented with a choice. The forced oaths of loyalty, extracted from the lords of King's Landing under threat of execution, were the foundation of Aegon's early reign. Lord Lyman Beesbury, the Master of Coin, refused. He had been there at the Great Council. He had sworn an oath to Rhaenyra, named heir by King Viserys' explicit decree. He spoke of the law, of honour, of the king's last words. He was silenced. The official chronicles say he was killed in the chaos of the council, an accident of war, but the truth whispered through the corridors of the Red Keep that the Knight of the Kingsguard, Sir Criston Cole, ended his life with his bare hands, smashing his head against the council table. A king who began his reign with the murder of a white-haired old lord in his own throne room. Whatever the method, the message was clear. Loyalty to Rhaenyra was death. The gold cloaks were secured by Larys Strong, the Master of Whisperers, the Clubfoot. Every man who wore the badge of the City Watch was made to bend the knee to Aegon. The gates of King's Landing were sealed. No ravens flew from the rookery. No ships sailed from the harbour. Dragonstone was left in a perfect, calculated silence, isolated from the truth of what had happened in the capital. The Greens had moved every piece into place, but a king needed to be crowned. A silent coup could not remain silent forever. They needed to present the realm with an undeniable fact. The swift coronation of Aegon II Targaryen in the Dragon Pit, bypassing the named heir, Rhaenyra, was a masterstroke of audacity. Aegon himself was not in the Red Keep when the decision was made. He had to be found. Sir Criston Cole and Prince Aemond searched the gutters of Flea Bottom. They found him in a child-fighting pit, a place of blood sport and cheap wine. Aegon did not want the crown. He knew his sister was the rightful heir. He knew what this war would cost, but duty was a heavy cloak, and the weight of his mother's ambition and his grandfather's cunning was inescapable. "It is my duty," he finally said, accepting the destiny that had been forced upon him. The ceremony was held in the Dragon Pit, the vast domed temple of dragonkind that crowned the city of King's Landing. The pit was filled with the lords of the Crown Lands, the wealthy merchants of the city, and the small folk who were allowed to witness the dawn of a new age. The High Septon placed the crown of Aegon the Conqueror on the brow of Aegon II. It was a crown of Valyrian steel, set with rubies, worn by the man who had forged the Iron Throne itself. It was a deliberate, powerful link. By placing that specific crown on his head, the Greens were saying that Aegon II was not a king by election, or by oath, or by decree of a dying man. He was a king by blood and fire, the direct continuation of the Conqueror's line. Sunfire, the golden dragon, was brought into the pit. It was a beautiful, terrible display of absolute power. The golden dragon was the most magnificent beast of the age, and he roared in approval of his rider. The crowd chanted. The bells of the great Sept of Baelor rang across the city. A new king was crowned in the heart of the realm. The silence of the coup had ended in a roar of fire, music and forced celebration. But across the Blackwater Bay, the silence was deafening. On Dragonstone, Rhaenyra received the news not from a raven, but from a smuggler, a whisper in the night. Her father was dead. Her brother had stolen her throne. The immediate division of the realm into blacks and greens, setting the stage for total war, happened in an instant. The ravens flew from both sides. The great houses of Westeros were forced to choose. Lord Cregan Stark of Winterfell received the ravens. He had broken bread with Rhaenyra. His father had sworn an oath to her at the Great Council. The North would remember. The banners of the direwolf flew for the blacks. The Riverlands were immediately divided. House Tully declared for Rhaenyra. But the houses of the river were split, setting the stage for some of the bitterest fighting of the war in the hills and fords of the Trident. The Westerlands, under Lord Jason Lannister, declared for Aegon. The gold of Casterly Rock would fill the green coffers, buying swords and ships. The Reach was the garden of the Greens. Oldtown, the seat of the Hightowers, was the heart of the new regime. Lord Tyrell sat in Highgarden, but his bannermen were deeply split. The Hightowers, the Redwynes, the Tarlis, they were the blades of the Reach for the Greens. The Stormlands were won for the Greens by a simple political promise. Lord Boros Baratheon was offered the betrothal of his daughter to Aegon's firstborn son. Rhaenyra sent Prince Lucerys to Storm's End to remind Lord Boros of his oath. He was turned away in contempt. The seeds of a tragedy in the skies over Shipbreaker Bay had already been sown. Prince Daemon Targaryen, the rogue prince, was on Dragonstone with Rhaenyra. He placed the crown of Queen Rhaenyra on her head, the Black Queen. She addressed her court. The painted table was covered in the carved wood of Westeros, the map of her kingdom. The dragons of Dragonstone were hers. She was the named heir of King Viserys I. She would fight for her birthright. The stage was set. The Iron Throne was the prize. Aegon II sat it in King's Landing, a man who had been forced into a role he never wanted. Surrounded by the architects of the coup, Rhaenyra waited in the shadow of the Dragonmont. A woman who had been raised for a throne she was now denied. 2 children of the same father, now mortal enemies. The Targaryen dynasty had survived Maegor the Cruel. It had survived the Great Sickness. It had survived the Faith Militant, but it could not survive this fracture. The dance of the dragons had begun, and the Iron Throne, that high seat of sharpened swords, was the very centre of the storm. The first blood would be drawn not by armies, but by children, sworn to carry messages of war in the desperate hope of securing an alliance. The ravens flew across a divided land. The dragons were mounted by riders who knew their enemy was their own blood. The realm had made its choice, but the war was far from decided. The Blacks held the older, wilder dragons, the formidable fleet of Driftmark, and the vast lands of the north, the Vale and the Trident. The Greens held the capital, the treasury, the largest army in the Reach, and the might of the Westerlands. The balance of power was a scale tipped by the flight of a single dragon in the night, a prince sent into a storm, waiting for the first true blow of the dance. The Green Council had acted with the precision of a dagger in the dark. Viserys I was dead, his body barely cold, and the Greens had already placed the Conqueror's crown upon the head of Aegon II. On Dragonstone, Rhaenyra Targaryen knew nothing of this. She was confined to her bed, recovering from a difficult birth that had nearly killed her, a lingering fever, keeping her weak and isolated from the court's whispers. When the ravens finally arrived, carrying the sealed messages from the capital, the truth struck her as a physical blow. Her father was dead. Her throne was stolen. Her children had been branded bastards by the very men her father had trusted. Rhaenyra's first reaction was not fire, but ice. A profound, stunned silence fell over her chamber. Those present said her face became a mask of cold fury, a terrible calm descending upon her that was far more frightening than any scream of rage. She understood in that terrible instant that her half-brother and his mother, Queen Alicent, had been planning this for years. Waiting for the moment Viserys drew his last breath, they had not simply seized the throne, they had erased her from the line of succession entirely, rewriting history as they saw fit. The promise her father made to the realm, the oaths sworn by every lord in the land, meant nothing against the raw power of a crown placed on a head in the capital. But Rhaenyra was not without her own resources, nor without loyalists who risked everything for her claim. A loyal Kingsguard, Sir Stephen Darklyn, had managed to smuggle one precious relic out of the Red Keep before the Greens could lock it away in the royal vaults. It was not the crown of Aegon the Conqueror, the circlet of rubies and Valyrian steel, but something perhaps more significant in this moment of defiance. The crown her father, Viserys I, had worn, the very circlet of gold and amethysts he had placed upon her head when he named her his heir, standing before the Iron Throne on Dragonstone, in the ancient hall of the Targaryen fortress. With this crown, Rhaenyra Targaryen was crowned Queen of the Andals, the Rhoynar, and the First Men. The Black Queen had declared her defiance, and the Iron Throne now had 2 sovereigns calling for its allegiance. The realm split along a fault line that had been forming for decades. The North, the Vale and the Riverlands rallied to the Black Queen's cause with surprising speed. Lord Cregan Stark of Winterfell pledged the swords of the North, an army hardened by cold and winter, a force of men who did not break easily. Lady Jane Arryn of the Vale, a woman who understood perfectly the fragility of a female claim in a man's world, committed her Falcon Knights and the full strength of the Mountains of the Moon. In the Riverlands, the Blackwoods raised their crimson banners for Rhaenyra. while the Brackens chose the side of the Greens, deepening an ancient rivalry into a bloody civil war within the war. The conflict was no longer a debate in the small council chambers of King's Landing, a matter of courtly intrigue. It was a gathering of storms across the entire continent, a schism in the very bedrock of the realm. Rhaenyra, still clinging to the fragile hope of a swift resolution that might spare the realm from outright devastation, sent her sons out as messengers and ambassadors. Prince Viserys flew north on his dragon, Vermax, to treat with the Starks and the Arryns. Prince Lucerys, her second son, a boy of only 14, flew south to Storm's End on his young dragon Arrax to seek the allegiance of Lord Boros Baratheon. It was a mission of diplomacy, but it ended in unspeakable disaster. Aemon Targaryen, the one-eyed brother of the Usurper king, was already at Storm's End. He had secured the allegiance of Lord Boros with promises of royal favour and marriage pacts. When Lucerys arrived, he was publicly mocked by Lord Baratheon and dismissed without the alliance he had come seeking. As he departed the castle and took flight into the teeth of a gathering storm, Aemond followed him on Vhagar, the largest and most fearsome living dragon in the known world. What transpired in the dark skies above Shipbreaker Bay remains a matter of heated debate among the historians of the Citadel. Aemond would later swear before the Iron Throne that he intended only to frighten the boy, to teach him a harsh lesson for taking his eye years before in a childhood brawl. But Vhagar is a dragon forged in the fires of war, a beast from the age of Aegon the Conqueror himself. She does not understand games or lessons. Vhagar closed on the smaller Arrax, and in a moment of pure terror and chaos, the older dragon tore the younger apart. Lucerys Velaryon, heir to Driftmark, prince of the realm, fell from the sky into the dark, churning waters of Shipbreaker Bay. His body was never recovered, swallowed whole by the sea that had given his house its name. When the news reached Rhaenyra on Dragonstone, the woman who had endured the theft of her birthright, the queen who had received a crown in defiance of a usurper, the leader who had rallied her armies, was replaced entirely by something far more dangerous. A mother consumed entirely by grief and rage. The political dispute was over. The war of succession had been rendered irrelevant the moment her son's blood touched the cold sea. What followed was not a conflict over thrones or symbols. It was a war of annihilation. The Dance of the Dragons had been born not in a throne room or a great council, but in a storm over a rocky bay. And it would not end until the fire of the dragons had consumed everything the Targaryens held dear. The Iron Throne, built from the surrendered swords of a conquered land, was about to be drenched in the blood of the conquerors themselves. And the realm was torn asunder by the very fire that had built it. The crown of the conqueror is a heavy thing. It is not simply a circlet of Valyrian steel adorned with rubies the size of a pigeon's egg. It is the weight of 3 centuries of conquest, of exceptionalism, of a family that held the realm together by the thinnest of threads. When Rhaenyra Targaryen placed that crown upon her head on Dragonstone, the thread finally snapped, and when Aegon II sat upon the Iron Throne in the Great Hall of the Red Keep, he was sitting atop a powder keg. The war that followed would not be a chivalrous struggle between rival houses. It would be a dragon's war, and the realm would be the anvil upon which they clashed. The first moves of the dance were cautious, almost tentative. Rhaenyra sent her sons out as messengers. Daemon, her husband, took Harrenhal, the Whisper, and a Shadow. He did not need to burn the great castle. The curse of Harren the Black was enough. But across the war table, the lords of Westeros began to make their choices. The Riverlands became the battlefield almost immediately. It is the heart of the continent, the crossroads of every great war. Here the Greens and Blacks met. Here the blood first spilled upon the earth. The opening campaigns of the Dance of the Dragons were not orderly marches of infantry. They were brutal raids, sieges and skirmishes. But the true nature of the conflict revealed itself when the dragons took flight. The first true clash of dragons occurred at Storm's End, though it was heartbreakingly brief. Lucerys Velaryon, Rhaenyra's son, met Aemond One-Eye and the ancient Vargar over the treacherous waters of Shipbreaker Bay. It was not a battle, it was a hunt. The young dragon Arax and his rider perished in the storm. The war became deeply personal. The mother of dragons had lost a son, and the realm lost its innocence. The dragons were no longer symbols of peace and unity. They were weapons of vengeance, and the sky was now a battlefield. The true trial by combat came at a castle called Rook's Rest. The holdfast itself was modest, but its strategic value was immense. Sir Criston Cole, the hand of the king to Aegon, devised a cruel trap. He laid siege to the castle with a deliberately vulnerable force. He knew the Blacks would not resist the opportunity to strike at the Kingsguard, who had once served Rhaenyra's father. He knew they would send a dragon to break the siege. He knew they would send Rhaenys Targaryen, the queen who never was, upon her dragon Meleys, the Red Queen. Cole did not intend to fight a conventional battle. He intended to kill a dragon with dragons. Aegon II took to the sky on Sunfire, the golden dragon, a creature of immense beauty and ferocity. He was not a seasoned warrior, but he was a king, and he felt the need to prove himself in the heat of battle. Aemond on Vargar was the shadow waiting behind the sun. When Meleys arrived, the trap was sprung. The three dragons met over the burning castle. The sky was painted in nothing but fire and blood. Meleys was fast, Sunfire was fierce, and Vargar was old and immense. It was not a dance. It was a slaughter. Vagar's jaws closed around Meleys' neck. The three beasts fell together in a tangle of scales and blood. Crashing into the tower of Rook's Rest, the castle collapsed. Rhaenys Targaryen vanished into the inferno, and King Aegon II was found in the rubble, his armor fused to his flesh by dragonfire, his body twisted and shattered by the fall. The battle at Rook's Rest left the Greens with a victory, but it was hollow. Their king was a cripple. The most decisive combat of the early war had been fought by dragon against dragon, leaving a trail of ash and broken bodies in its wake. He was brought back to the Red Keep in profound secrecy. The maesters worked tirelessly to keep him alive, but the man who had been crowned Aegon II was no more. What remained was a creature of pure agony, locked inside a ruined body. He could no longer speak, no longer move, no longer rule. This was the moment Aemond One-Eye had been waiting for. He had driven his brother toward this war, and he reaped the reward. With the king entirely incapacitated, Aemond was named Prince Regent. He took the Iron Throne as if it were his own, and he did not sit softly upon it. He leaned into the blades. He bled upon the jagged seat of power, and he made the entire court bleed with him. The regency of Aemond One-Eye was marked by a cold, unchecked brutality. He ruled from the throne, not through law or legacy, but through the immediate and absolute threat of dragonfire. Vargar was his voice. The Riverlands became his canvas. He burned castles and towns. He destroyed entire bloodlines. He seemed to delight in the carnage. The Iron Throne, under Aemond, was no longer a symbol of governance. It was a weapon. He wielded it, and he wielded Vargar as extensions of his own vengeful will. He was young, arrogant, and utterly ruthless. And yet, amidst the smoke and the screaming, a terrible realization began to dawn. A truth that would haunt the Targaryen dynasty for the rest of its days. The dragons had built the realm. Valerion's fire had forged the throne from the swords of the defeated. For 3 centuries, the dragon was the ultimate deterrent, the absolute guarantee of Targaryen supremacy. But what happens when dragons are turned against dragons? The war was consuming the very foundation of their power. Each dragon that died in the dance was a piece of the dynasty's soul being ripped away. The realization crept into the minds of the lords, the small folk, and perhaps even the Targaryens themselves. The dragons, these magnificent creatures of fire and magic, were no longer the answer to the realm's problems. They were the problem. They were tearing the 7 kingdoms apart. The war that was meant to decide who would sit on the Iron Throne was rapidly becoming a war that would decide if the Iron Throne and the society it ruled could even survive the fire that forged it. The war was no longer a simple question of succession. It was becoming a wildfire, fed by pride, vengeance, and the very power that had once made the Targaryens seem like gods among men. As Aemon's reign of fire spread across the Riverlands, and the Blacks gathered their remaining strength, every house in Westeros knew the next blow would fall, and the Iron Throne itself, rising from the shadows of the Red Keep, stood cold and waiting, a monument in the shape of a dragon's maw, prepared to devour the next claimant who dared to reach for its edge. Before we dive deeper into this incredible journey, I'm curious, where in the world are you watching this from? Drop a comment below and let our global community know. And if you're finding this as mind-blowing as I am, hit that like button to help more people discover this story. The fire at Rook's Rest had burned itself out, but it left a very different world in its wake. King Aegon II was a shattered man, confined to his bed in the Red Keep, his skin fused to his armour in places, his screams echoing through the halls of Maegor's holdfast. His absence from command left the Greens rudderless. Queen Dowager, Alicent Hightower, and Ser Criston Cole struggled to hold the realm together in the name of a king who could barely stand, a king mutilated by his own dragon's fire. And halfway across the Blackwater, on Dragonstone, Rhaenyra Targaryen faced a decision that would define her reign before it even truly began. The blockade of the Gullet was a slow poison administered by Lord Corlys Velaryon. His fleet choked off any hope of resupply for the capital. Inside the walls of King's Landing, the small folk began to starve. The treasury had been drained to pay for the war in the Riverlands, and the Crown's credit was exhausted. The price of bread became a myth. The city grew thin and angry. Rhaenyra's strategy was not to burn the city, but to take it whole. She understood that a burned city was a worthless prize. She worked through intermediaries, through spies and whispers. The Gold Cloaks, the City Watch, had a long memory. They had sworn for Rhaenyra once before, in a courtyard full of lords. The commander of the Watch, Luther Largent, was approached. The price for his loyalty was not simply gold, but a promise of favour, of reward, of a place in the New Order where his service would never be forgotten. And so, in the dead of night, the gates were opened. Rhaenyra Targaryen entered King's Landing not as a conqueror wreathed in dragonfire, but as a queen reclaiming her seat. The city's surrender was nearly silent. The Red Keep fell without a single stone cast from a trebuchet. It was the quietest conquest in the history of the Seven Kingdoms. A city starved into submission. The halls of the Red Keep were familiar to her. She had grown up in these corridors. She passed the stone walls where she had raced with her brothers. She saw the doors of her father's chambers. The weight of memory pressed down upon her. When she reached the throne room, it was dark, lit only by the torches that flanked the great iron beast at the far end. She climbed the steps to the Iron Throne, the great black mountain of twisted steel and shattered blades, the fabled Thousand Swords, a monument to Aegon the Conqueror's victory. Her hands touched the cold, rough metal. She could feel every nick, every broken point. This was the seat of power, forged by Balerion's flame. She turned and she sat, and the throne drank her blood. The jagged edges of the seat of 1,000 swords bit into her palms. Cuts opened on her legs, blood seeping through her gown, staining the cold stone beneath her. The court watched in stunned silence. An omen the maesters would write, a sign. Aegon the Conqueror himself had decreed that no ruler should sit comfortably upon the throne. The throne was a trap, a test. Many kings had left their blood upon it, but a queen bleeding upon her coronation was a whisper that would not die. Rhaenyra smiled through the pain, but the blood did not stop. It soaked the throne she had fought so hard to claim, dark stains that would never quite wash away. With the crown upon her brow, the same circlet her father had worn, Rhaenyra Targaryen became the first woman to sit the Iron Throne as its undisputed sovereign. It was the culmination of a war that had cost her everything. Her father was dead. Her children were dead or scattered. Her husband, Prince Daemon, was fighting a brutal campaign in the Riverlands, a shadow haunting the castles of their enemies. She was surrounded by enemies wearing the masks of friends. The treasury was her first desperate crisis. A crown of gold requires a treasury of gold. But the vaults were echoing and bare. Aegon II and his mother, the Queen Dowager, had stripped them. Every dragon, every stag was gone. Food was short. The war had burned the fields of the Riverlands and the Reach. The small folk of King's Landing were boiling the bark from the trees to pay her soldiers, to feed her retainers, to buy the loyalty of the sellswords who had flocked to her banner. Rhaenyra had no choice but to raise taxes. She levied heavy duties on every barrel of grain, every cask of wine, every barge that passed through the city gates. She demanded loans from the Faith and the Guild of Merchants. The bankers of the Iron Bank turned her away. The merchants who had smiled at her arrival now hoarded their gold. The small folk who had cheered her as the queen who would bring peace now cursed her as a tyrant, whose taxes starved their children. History remembers her as the half-year queen, because she did not hold the throne for long. Barely 180 days passed between her coronation and her flight. In those 6 months, she watched her kingdom slip through her fingers. The paranoia set in like a sickness. She saw traitors in every shadow. Lord Corlys Velaryon, the sea snake, the man who had made her fleet possible, withdrew from her court. Disgusted by her methods and the draining of his own coffers, she ordered the execution of the Dragonseed Nettles, accusing her of seducing Prince Daemon and plotting against the crown. Adam Velaryon, another loyal dragon rider, one of the best she had, was forced to flee for his life, hunted by her own decrees. The Dragonseeds themselves, the lowborn men and women she had raised up to ride the wild dragons, began to turn against her. Hugh Hammer and Ulf the White, hungry for land and titles, and easily corrupted by promises from the Green Loyalists, betrayed her at the Second Battle of Tumbleton. The very dragons she had unleashed upon the realm were now being used against her. Her power was crumbling. The breaking point came from below. The mob of King's Landing, driven mad by starvation and taxes and the fear of the dragons that circled the city, rose up. They stormed the Dragon Pit, the great domed temple on Rhaenys' hill where the royal dragons were housed during peacetime. The dragons trapped within, including Syrax, Rhaenyra's own mount, were overwhelmed by sheer numbers. They were torn apart by the thousands of screaming small folk, their bodies hacked to pieces in a frenzy of terror and rage. Rhaenyra watched from the Red Keep as her power literally burned and bled in the heart of the city. The dragons were dead. The city was lost. Without her dragon, without her allies, without the love of her people, she could not hold the throne. She was forced to flee, to abandon her crown and the seat she had bled for. Slipping out of the city she had conquered only 6 months earlier, she retreated to Dragonstone, the island of her birth, seeking shelter from the storm she had created. But the Iron Throne is not a forgiving seat. The blood she had spilled upon it demanded a price. The city she left behind fell into chaos, waiting for the return of the broken king she had deposed. The dance of the dragons was not over. It was simply entering its final, most brutal act. The throne that had accepted Rhaenyra only to wound her was now empty, and it would not remain so for long. The blood of the queen stained the swords of the Iron Throne. It had run down the jagged edges and dripped onto the cold stone floor of the throne room. It was more than a physical wound. It was an ill omen that whispered through the halls of the Red Keep. Rhaenyra Targaryen had achieved her life's goal. She sat the throne of her father, of Aegon the Conqueror, but the throne did not welcome her. The war she had fought to claim it was far from over. The city of King's Landing was a powder keg. The common folk had endured months of siege, occupation, and the crushing weight of war taxes. Aegon II's regime had drained the treasury to pay for swords and sellswords. Rhaenyra's arrival meant to be a liberation, brought only more demands. The queen needed gold to secure her rule, to pay her own loyalists, and to feed the great dragons that slumbered in the dragon pit. Every sack of grain was taxed. Every copper penny was squeezed from the hands of the bakers, and the butchers, and the whores. The small folk began to starve. They began to resent. They looked up at the dragon pit, the symbol of their oppression, and they began to hate the dragons with a pure, desperate. The Targaryens had ruled by fear for 300 years, but fear, when mixed with starvation, does not cower, it fights back, and so a leader emerged from the gutters, a man known only as the Shepherd. He was a prophet of the common people. He preached a simple, devastating message. The dragons were not gods, they were monsters, sent by the Seven Hells to torment the faithful. The Targaryens were not kings, they were devils in human skin who ruled through demonic fire. His words found fertile ground in the hearts of the starving. Thousands gathered to hear him speak, standing in the shadow of the dragon pit itself. Rhaenyra's throne room heard the rumble of the crowd. Her council urged her to act, but she was paralyzed by the reports of her half-brother's survival. The city rippled with tension, and then the storm broke. The mob turned on the dragon pit. It was not an army. It was a flood of rags and fury. They tore down the gates. They swarmed into the great domed structure where the dragons were kept chained. The animals within, Syrax, Dreamfire, Tyraxes, Morgul and Shrykos, were awakened to a nightmare. The small folk attacked with no thought for their own survival. They stabbed with spears. They shot with crossbows. They threw stones. Dragonfire consumed dozens, hundreds. But there were always more bodies to fill the gap. One by one, the dragons fell. Dreamfire broke her chains, but was brought down by the sheer weight of the mob. The young dragons, too small to fight free, were butchered in their pens. Syrax, Rhaenyra's golden queen, rose into the air free of the pit but wounded. The mob followed her through the streets, raining missiles upon her until the great beast crashed into the rooftops of the city. In a single bloody afternoon, the power of the Targaryens was broken. The dragons were dead. The Shepherd's rebellion, a revolt of the powerless, had succeeded where the might of the Greens and Blacks had failed. The news of the dragon pit reached the Red Keep like a thunderclap. Rhaenyra understood instantly. Without her dragon, without the fear the dragons commanded, her rule was finished. The mob that had destroyed the beasts would not stop until they had torn down the queen herself. She had to flee. It was not a strategic withdrawal. It was a desperate, scrambling escape. She dressed in coarse cloth to hide her identity. She took her surviving son, the boy Aegon, and gathered what little gold she could carry. She slipped out of a secret passage in the castle walls, leaving behind the throne she had bled for. The Queen of the Seven Kingdoms became a fugitive on the roads of her own realm, heading for the only sanctuary she had left, the island fortress of Dragonstone. She arrived at Dragonstone, expecting the loyalty of her garrison, but Dragonstone had already been taken. Aegon II had slipped the noose in King's Landing and made his way to the Targaryen ancestral home. He was waiting for her. The trap was sprung. Rhaenyra was seized as soon as she set foot on the shore. The betrayal was absolute. The very men who had sworn to defend her, who had held Dragonstone in her name, had turned their cloaks. They had seen the tide of the war shift, and they had decided that a live queen was worth less than a dead one. They delivered her directly into the hands of her half-brother. Aegon II did not hesitate. He did not speak. He simply gestured to his dragon, Sunfire, and there, in the shadow of the stone drum, he fed his sister to the beast. Rhaenyra Targaryen, the realm's delight, the Black Queen, the first woman to sit the Iron Throne, was devoured alive. Her body was consumed. Her reign was over. The Dance of the Dragons had claimed its most prominent victim. The war did not end with Rhaenyra's death. It would rage on for a time, consuming the last of the dragons and the last of the great house's strength, but the Iron Throne remained. It was a stark monument, cold and sharp, waiting for the next hand to grip its blades. The Targaryens had never truly recovered from the fall of the dragons. The dynasty would survive for another century and a half, but the magic was gone. The throne became a symbol, not just of power, but of the cost of it. The blood of the queen and the fire that had forged the realm seemed to stain the very air around it. The Dance of the Dragons had torn the veil from the Targaryen mystique. The small folk had seen their gods fall, The lords had seen their masters bleed. The Iron Throne would be claimed again and again by strong men and weak, by the just and the mad, but it would never again be the throne of a dragon lord. It was simply the seat of a kingdom that had been broken and stitched back together, a constant reminder of the fire and blood that had built it, and the fire and blood that would one day consume it. The fury of the shepherd's mob had burned itself out, leaving King's Landing raw and exhausted. The pits were empty. The sky was silent. For the first time in centuries, no dragon flew over the city. But the dance was not yet finished. Rhaenyra's hold on the throne had shattered the moment the mob rose. She fled a queen without a dragon or a city, and her half-brother, Aegon II, was carried back to the Red Keep to claim his throne once more. It was a second reign, but it was a reign of pure agony. His body was ruined, scorched from the battle at Rook's Rest. His bones never set right, his mind clouded by milk of the poppy and the bitter taste of everything he had lost. He was the victor, but he was a broken king who could not stand unassisted. He ruled from a bed, not from a throne. And yet, even this hollow victory was not allowed to last. The realm had no more appetite for civil war, but it had an appetite for peace. A quiet poison was poured into his cup. The reign of Aegon II did not end in a battle. It ended in a quiet room with a cup of wine and a long silent gasp. He died in his chambers, not with a roar, but with a whimper. His brief and agonizing second reign ending in the dark of a room he had won, only by losing everything. When the poison finally took him, there was no grand funeral. His body was laid to rest quietly, almost secretly, as if the kingdom itself was ashamed of the war it had just survived. The crown did not go to another rival. There was no one left. The only suitable heir was a boy of 10, the son of Rhaenyra and Daemon Targaryen, who was crowned Aegon III. His coronation was a muted affair, no grand feast, no tourney. The dragon pit stood above them, a hollow shell of stone and shadow. The small boy looked out at the lords and ladies of Westeros and saw them as strangers, or worse, enemies. He had seen his mother's dragon devour his uncle. He had been a hostage in the very court that now knelt to him. He sat upon the Iron Throne, his legs dangling over the edge of the seat of kings, and he did not smile. He did not know how anymore. He had inherited a traumatized realm, a kingdom that had bled itself white for a chair made of swords, a dragonless realm. The age of fire and blood had ended. The long winter of recovery had begun. A boy king cannot rule alone, and so a regency was formed, a council of regents appointed to rule in his name until he came of age. But the lords of Westeros learned quickly that the death of the dragons did not mean the end of the dance. The war simply changed its shape. The bleak years of the Regency were a war of whispers, of signatures, of marriage pacts made and broken in the same breath. Rival lords fought for control of the young king's signature, for the right to call themselves the true power behind the Iron Throne. The hand of the king became a revolving door. Men rose and fell with the seasons. The Council of Regents was a nest of vipers. A boy king was a delicious prize, a signature to be bought, traded, or stolen. Each regent wanted a piece of him. Lord Unwin Peake, a man consumed by ambition, dominated the council for a time. He tried to bury the memory of Rhaenyra so deeply that no one would ever speak her name again. He forced the king to sign decrees that painted his own mother as a traitor. The boy signed them without argument, because arguing required a will he no longer possessed. Peake tried to arrange a marriage with his own daughter, to bind his bloodline permanently to the throne. The king, silent as ever, simply refused. He refused to meet the girl. He refused to attend the feast. He sat on his throne and let Peake scream and rage. And then, when Peake finally fell from power, the king did not so much as blink. The regents came and went. There were nearly a dozen of them over the years. Some good, some bad, most simply ambitious. They fought over the king's presence, like children fighting over a toy. The realm suffered. The treasury, emptied by war, was squandered by mismanagement and greed. The small folk starved while the lords argued over precedence. It was a long, grey, grinding decade. The young king spent his days staring out of windows, watching the sea. He barely ate. He barely spoke. He was a prisoner of his own crown. The lords who surrounded him seemed to him like vultures, tearing pieces of the realm for themselves. The Iron Throne itself seemed to grow larger around him as he stayed small. It was a chair designed by a dragon lord for a dragon lord, but the last dragon lord was a boy who had stopped dreaming of fire. He dreamed only of silence. The only moment of clarity in this long grey stretch came in the so-called Hour of the Wolf, when Lord Cregan Stark came south from the north to bring justice to those who had poisoned and betrayed the realm. He executed a handful of the conspirators, filled the office of Hand with his own men, and restored a brutal order. And then, as abruptly as he had arrived, he left. It was a flash of winter in a kingdom that had forgotten what true cold felt like. But the cold remained in the king's heart. Aegon III grew older, but he never grew warm. He became a man who ruled but did not lead, a man who sat the Iron Throne but never mastered it. And in the Dragon Pit, a different kind of dying happened. The last living dragon was not a beast of legend. It was a pitiful, sickly creature, born in the years after the war, covered in sores and shivering in the cold. It could not fly. It could barely breathe flame. It was a creature of weakness, the final ember of a fire that had burned for 3 centuries. The dragon keepers tried to tend to it. Eggs were placed in cradles of fire, hoping to coax new life from the old magic. It was all for nothing. The last dragon opened its eyes, and then closed them, and faded quietly from the world. The death of the last dragon was not a battle. It was an illness, a quiet passing. The Iron Throne, which had been forged from the swords of 1,000 enemies by the breath of the Black Dread, sat above the land, but the power that had created it was gone. The Targaryens were no longer dragons. They were just people. Kings and queens who could be killed like any other. The sword that had hung over Westeros for centuries had lost its edge. For the first time, the throne did not feel like the seat of a god. It felt like the artifact of a lost religion. The swords were cold. The history in them was cold. The Targaryens had no more fire to offer. The 7 kingdoms looked at the Iron Throne and realized, perhaps for the first time, that it was just a pile of old swords. It could not defend itself. It could not breathe fire. It could not enforce its will. It could only sit there, waiting for someone strong enough to claim it by their own merit. The age of the dragons was over. The age of men had truly begun. And men, without the terror of Dragonflame to bind them, would prove to be far more complicated subjects to rule. The Iron Throne did not go anywhere. It stayed in the Red Keep, but the shadow it cast grew shorter and shorter, until all that was left was the hard reality of the steel. The throne remained the centre of the world, but it had become what Aegon the Conqueror had always feared it might. A symbol without the magic to enforce its fear. The questions that would define the next century were no longer questions of dragonfire. They were questions of succession, of legitimacy, of who had the right to sit in the seat of power when the power itself had to be earned by politics and steel, and not simply inherited by blood and fire. The Targaryen dynasty would survive for another 150 years, but it was a long, slow dusk. Could they hold the throne without the fire that made it? The kingdom Aegon III left behind was a shell of its former self. The dragons were dead. The treasury was drained. The scars of the dance ran deep across every river, every castle, every family. He ruled for 26 years, a quiet, melancholic king who never quite recovered from the horrors he witnessed as a child. The realm was ruled by regents for much of his youth, and by the time he died in the Great Pestilence, the fire of the Targaryen dynasty had been reduced to embers. The crown passed to his eldest son, a boy barely into his teens. His name was Daeron, and he burned with a fire his father had never possessed. He was everything his father was not. Bold, confident, restless, sharp as a blade, and twice as eager to draw blood. He looked at the fragile peace his father had maintained and saw only unfinished business. Daeron I was barely 15 years old when he took the throne, but he was already consumed by a single, all-consuming ambition. He studied the maps carved into the painted table at Dragonstone and saw an insult that had been left unaddressed for over a century. Aegon the Conqueror had unified 6 of the 7 kingdoms, but Dorne had defied him, buying its independence through fire and blood and the assassination of the Conqueror's beloved queen. For over 100 years, Dorne remained an independent principality, a constant thorn in the side of the Iron Throne. Daeron became obsessed with finishing what the Conqueror had failed to do. He studied every failed campaign, read the accounts of the First Dornish War, and carefully noted where Aegon had overreached. He was determined to be the one to bring Dorne to heel. He was young, brilliant, and utterly confident in his own genius. The realm called him the Young Dragon, a name he cultivated with pride. He surrounded himself with other young lords who shared his restless ambition. In 157 years after Aegon's conquest, Daeron launched his invasion. It was a masterstroke of military planning, studied by generals for generations to come. Instead of a single grinding assault through the passes, which the Dornish expected, he devised a perfectly synchronized 3-pronged attack. The main host marched by land under Lord Tyrell, drawing the Dornish army to the Boneway. A second force, carried by the Iron Fleet under Admiral Alan Velaryon, landed by sea, threatening Sunspear directly. And a third force, led by Daeron himself, took a secret goat path through the Red Mountains that the Dornish never expected an army to cross. The speed of the invasion was breathtaking. The Dornish lords were outmaneuvered at every turn. Their castles were taken before they could be properly garrisoned. Within a single season, the resistance crumbled. The young Prince of Dawn surrendered. Sunspear opened its gates. The young dragon had done what the Conqueror could not. He had seemingly brought the Desert Kingdom to its knees. He dictated his own terms, left a garrison of 10,000 men in the Dornish castles, and returned to King's Landing in triumph. He even wrote a book about it, called The Conquest of Dawn, so that no one would ever forget his achievement. The whole realm celebrated its young hero king, but the celebration was profoundly premature. The brilliance of Daeron's conquest masked a fatal flaw. Holding Dorne proved to be an entirely different challenge than conquering it. The Dornish had not been broken, they had been waiting. They watched the dragons burn their fields. They watched their princes kneel. But they kept their true defiance, hidden behind a mask of submission. Almost immediately after Daeron sailed for King's Landing, the desert rose again. It was not a single pitched battle. It was 1,000 cuts, a guerrilla war unlike anything the Knights of the Reach or the Stormlands had ever faced. Garrisons were massacred in the night. Supply trains were ambushed and burned in the mountain passes. Water sources were poisoned. The Vulture King emerged from the Red Mountains, a ghost wearing a beak of bronze, rallying the small folk to a secret war. The shining victory of the young dragon crumbled into a nightmare of constant, grinding, hopeless conflict. The cost was staggering. Tens of thousands of lives, on both sides, were lost in the attempt to hold what had been so swiftly taken. The realm bled for Dawn year after year, with no end in sight. Daeron's book began to read like a bitter fantasy. Daeron knew he had to return. He could not let his conquest slip away. He rode south again in 158, determined to crush the rebellion once and for all. The campaign was fierce, but the outcome was uncertain. The Dornish, weary of war, sent word to the king. They wished to treat for peace. A parley was arranged beneath a sacred banner of truce. Daeron, perhaps eager for any way to end the endless bloodshed, or perhaps blinded by his own young vanity, agreed to meet the Dornish lords in person. He rode out to a place called the Weil, with a small guard of his finest knights and Kingsguard. He trusted the ancient laws of hospitality and the sanctity of a banner of peace. It was a trap. The moment he was within reach, the Dornish fell upon him. The young dragon was killed under that same banner of peace. His entire escort was cut down with him. The boy king who had conquered Dawn was dead before he reached the age of 18. His dream of a unified continent died with him in the dust of dawn. The lesson was brutally clear. A crown is won with steel, but it is held with wisdom and trust. Holding a kingdom is infinitely harder than conquering one. The body of Daeron I was returned to King's Landing a year later, wrapped in a casket of lead and golden wood, a silent testament to the cost of unfinished conquest. His life and his folly stand as a stark monument to the limits of sheer ambition. The throne he left behind was cold, empty, and scarred by the weight of a kingdom that refused to be tamed. It passed to his younger brother, a man who looked at the world through a completely different lens, one shaped not by steel or conquest, but entirely by faith in the Seven, and the holy words whispered within the starry sept of Old Town. The glory of Daeron I was intoxicating. The bards sang of the young dragon, the boy king who conquered Dawn, but as we saw, the surrender was a mask. The Dornish never truly yielded their spears. In the year 161 after the conquest, Daeron was betrayed under a banner of peace. He was killed, along with his closest guards, in a field outside Sunspear. The young dragon was dead at 18. His conquest crumbled into dust. The crown passed to his brother, Baelor, but Baelor was a Septon first and a king second. He was called Baelor the Blessed, and his piety took a terrible toll on the realm. He made peace with Dawn, walking barefoot across the bone-dry passes to seal a treaty with the very men who had murdered his brother. He locked away the kingdom's last dragons, believing them to be creatures of sin. He starved himself, prayed endlessly, and left the governance of the realm to his uncle, Viserys. Viserys II was the hand the realm needed. For decades, he had been the quiet architect of stability, holding the throne steady while Baelor prayed and Daeron fought. But Viserys was old by the time he finally wore the crown himself. He reigned for barely a single year before passing from the world. His true legacy was the son he left behind, a son who would undo everything Viserys had built. Aegon IV was crowned in the Red Keep, and the rot set in immediately. He was a man of enormous appetites and zero discipline. His reign of unchecked corruption, greed and gluttony was not a gradual slide into decay. It was an immediate plunge. He surrounded himself with flatterers and sycophants. The royal treasury, carefully hoarded by Viserys, was scattered to the winds. Aegon ate and drank until he could barely move. His court became famous for its debauchery, a spectacle of excess that shocked even the jaded lords of the Seven Kingdoms. The floors of the Red Keep were slick with spilled wine. The air was thick with the smoke of exotic spices. But the state of his body was merely a reflection of the state of his rule. This was a reign defined by the systematic debasement of the Iron Throne's dignity. Aegon sold everything that was not nailed down. He sold seats on the small council. He sold royal charters for new towns. He sold the right to collect taxes. He invented new offices just so he could sell them. Justice was a commodity. A man could murder a peasant or steal land from a neighbour, and if he had enough gold to buy the king's favour, the charge would simply disappear. The throne stopped being a seat of justice. It became a throne of gold and lies. Of all his follies, perhaps the most humiliating for the Iron Throne was his pet project to invade Dawn. Daeron had failed with steel. Aegon, in his infinite wisdom, decided to try with trickery. He commissioned a massive fleet of warships, but these were no ordinary ships. They were massive, painted, wooden constructions, designed to look like dragons from a distance. The plan was to launch a naval invasion of Dawn, and the sight of these magnificent monsters would surely terrify the Dornish into surrender. 1,000 carpenters and shipwrights laboured for months. The fleet was assembled at great cost. When it finally sailed south, it was a grand spectacle, but the Dornish were not terrified. They were amused. They watched the ships wallow in the water, tactically useless, enormous lumbering targets. The Dornish fleet, or even just a few fast galleys with fire arrows, swooped in and burned them to the waterline. The great wooden dragons of the Iron Throne sank into the summer sea, a monument to the king's vanity. As the years wore on, Aegon grew fatter and sicker. He spent his last years wallowing in the foulest excesses he could imagine, his body finally failing him. He knew he was dying, and in his final moments, he committed the greatest act of malice the Targaryen dynasty had ever seen. He had always hated his son, Daeron. Daeron was bookish, gentle and trueborn. Aegon spread whispers that Daeron was not his son at all, that he was the bastard of Prince Aemon the Dragon Knight. Whether this was true or a dying king's venomous lie, it did not matter. On his deathbed, Aegon the Unworthy called for a decree. He wanted to legitimize all of his bastards, every last one of them. His hand, Lord Bracken, tried to refuse him, but Aegon threatened to curse him until the end of his bloodline, and so the decree was sealed with the royal sigil. In that single act, Aegon IV shattered the legitimacy of the Targaryen crown forever. He created an army of princes who had no mother, but whose father was a king. The great bastards were given Targaryen names. Daemon Waters became Daemon Blackfire. He was given the sword of the Conqueror, Blackfire itself, which Aegon had stolen from his own true son. The realm was fractured. The throne belonged to Daeron II. But Aegon had handed his true-born son a realm full of enemies who all carried the same ambition. Daeron the Good ascended the throne of a kingdom poisoned by his father. The treasury was empty. The court was corrupt, and across the narrow sea, and in every corner of the realm, the great bastards were gathering their banners. The crown sat uneasily on the head of the second Daeron. He knew that the peace he cherished was an illusion. A storm was gathering. It had a name, and its sword was drawn. The reign of Aegon the Unworthy left the Iron Throne stained in a way that no amount of gold or velvet could conceal. The king's legitimization of his great bastards on his deathbed was not an act of charity or paternal affection. It was a final, deliberate act of chaos, a parting curse upon a realm he had spent a lifetime debasing. The sword Blackfire, passed down from Aegon the Conqueror to the heir of the dragon, was given not to the crown prince, Daeron, but to Daemon Waters. And with that gesture, Aegon the Unworthy lit the fuse on a war that would outlive him for generations. Daemon Blackfire's claim to the Iron Throne, backed by the possession of the ancestral sword, Blackfire, was a powerful formula. The sword itself was a symbol of the Conqueror, a piece of Targaryen legitimacy that could be held in the hand. It whispered of a right that went beyond the ink on a decree. For many, a king who wielded the sword of the Conqueror was a king blessed by conquest itself. Daemon grew into a warrior of immense capability, a mirrored image of the young Aegon the Conqueror. He embodied the martial ideal of Valyrian kingship that Daeron II, a scholar and a diplomat, could never project. The rumblings of war began long before the first blood was shed. The court of Daeron II was a place of learning and diplomacy, heavily influenced by his Dornish wife, Queen Miria, and the Dornish nobles who filled the royal council. This was a bitter pill for many of the old houses of the Reach and the Stormlands, who remembered the long wars against Dorne. They saw a king who spoke softly and wore silks instead of steel. They saw Daemon Blackfire, a knight of unparalleled skill, generous, handsome, a living embodiment of the warrior king that Aegon the Conqueror had once been. When the whispers started that Daeron might be a bastard born of the Unworthy's queen and a Dornish prince, the excuse for war was found. Whether Daeron's parentage was truly in question or merely a convenient lie, it provided the moral armor for Daemon supporters to take up arms. They were not rebelling against the rightful king, they told themselves. They were restoring the true dragon to the throne. This created the deep ideological split between those who supported the Red Dragon, the rightful King Daeron II, and those who rallied to the Black Dragon, Daemon Blackfire. The Red Dragon was the law, the legitimate heir by the strict order of succession, but the Black Dragon was the promise of glory, the rejection of Dornish influence that had crept into the court, and a return to an older, warrior-oriented Targaryen supremacy. It was a rebellion of knights and lords who felt that their honour had been stolen by the soft hands of Dornish princes and maesters. The Southron lords, the friends of Daeron, stood for stability and the integrity of the crown. The Northern and Reach lords who flocked to Daemon stood for a different kind of honour, a chivalric ideal that placed martial prowess above legal precedent. The armies converged on a field in the Reach, a place that would be forever known as the Redgrass Plain, the climactic battle of the Redgrass Field, where the Blackfire Rebellion was crushed at a devastating cost. The battle was a bitter, grinding affair that lasted much of a day. The Loyalists were led by the Prince of Summerhall, Aeron's son, the Marshal Baelor Breakspear, who met the Black Dragon's fury with a disciplined line. The battlefield was a masterpiece of strategy and a horror of execution. Daemon's forces were powerful, heavy cavalry and hardened knights, but the Loyalists held the superior position. Prince Baelor deployed the archers of the Raven's Teeth under Sir Brynden Rivers on a wooded hill, raining death upon the Blackfire flank. Daemon, seeing his army being torn apart from a distance, made the desperate decision to charge directly at his brother, the king. The slog through the mud and the storm of arrows was brutal. He almost reached his goal, cutting down men like the legendary Gwaine Corbray in single combat, but the sheer volume of arrows and the tactical patience of the Loyalists forced a fatal mistake. The moment he fell, surrounded by the bodies of his bodyguards and his twins, Aegon and Aemon, the rebellion died with him. The cost was immense. The flower of Westerosi chivalry lay dead, and the dream of a warrior king was drowned in blood. The flight of the surviving Blackfires to Essos, establishing a permanent shadow threat to the throne. Daemon's youngest sons, bitter, angry and exiled, fled across the narrow sea with the remnants of their supporters. They took with them the banner of the Black Dragon, ideology of the rightful king, and the burning hatred of the Red Dragon in King's Landing. They established a court in exile, a throne in waiting in the free cities, endlessly plotting invasions, hiring sellswords, and waiting for the moment when Westeros was weak enough to bleed. The Golden Company was formed by these exiles, a legion of sellswords bound by a contract to one day cross the sea and restore the Black Dragon to the Iron Throne. The Golden Company was more than just sellswords. They were a nation in exile. They kept their vows. They spoke the common tongue within their camps, and they raised their sons to dream of the green hills of Westeros. The contract was written in blood on the red grass field. For generations they waited, serving the free cities, fighting the wars of Essos, but always turning their eyes towards the Sunset Sea. Every Blackfire pretender who raised the banner found a ready army among the exiles. The scars of the red grass field never truly healed. They simply went underground, festering in the courts of Tyrosh and Liz, and in the contracts of sellsword companies who swore their blades to a lost cause. The realm had survived the first great test of its unity since the Dance of the Dragons, but the peace that followed was a tense one. Built on the bones of a defeated rebellion, King Daeron II had proven that the crown could hold, but at a terrible price. The shadow of the Blackfire pretenders would hang over the throne for decades to come. A constant reminder that a sword given was not always a sword held securely, and that a throne forged from a conqueror's ambition could be claimed by anyone bold enough to reach for it. The lessons of the red grass field would harden into policy, and the scars of that day would fester into new conflicts, as the realm's wounds were not yet done bleeding. The first Blackfire rebellion ended in blood and fire on the red grass field. Daemon Blackfire lay dead, cut down by bracken arrows, his twin sons slain beside him. The rebellion was crushed, but the peace that followed was a fragile one. King Daeron II ruled a kingdom deeply divided between those who remained loyal to the Red Dragon and those who nursed their grievances in silence, dreaming of the Black. The realm held its breath, waiting for the first crack in the order of things. And that crack came not with a sword, but with a cough. In the year 209, after Aegon's conquest, a plague arose in the slums of King's Landing and swept across the Seven Kingdoms like wildfire. They called it the Great Spring Sickness. It was indiscriminate in its cruelty, taking the strong and the weak, the wealthy and the poor. The Iron Throne itself was not spared. King Daeron II, the wise and gentle king, fell to the sickness. His death was a profound shock to the realm, a sudden void where a steady hand had been. But the tragedy did not end there. The royal family was decimated. Prince Valar, the king's grandson and an heir to the throne, perished alongside his brothers. The line of succession, carefully built over a generation, was shattered in a matter of weeks. The crown passed to Daeron's second surviving son, Aerys I, and Aerys was a man utterly unprepared for the burden of rule. He was a scholar, a recluse who spent his days lost in dusty tomes of prophecy and history. He had no interest in feasts, in courtly intrigue, in the endless petitions of lords. He wanted only to be left alone with his books. A king who does not rule creates a vacuum, and into that vacuum stepped a man of shadow and whisper, a figure who would become one of the most feared and reviled men in Targaryen history. Brynden Rivers the Bloodraven. Bloodraven was one of the great bastards of Aegon the Unworthy, a crimson stain on the white sheet of Targaryen legitimacy. He was an albino, with skin as pale as milk and hair the colour of bone. A wine-red birthmark, shaped like a raven, covered half his cheek and neck. He had one eye, the other lost in some skirmish. He was a master archer, a cunning spy master, and a practitioner of the dark arts. He had served Daeron II loyally, commanding the Raven's Teeth at the Red Grass Field, where he loosed the arrows that slew Daemon Blackfire's men. He was the master of whisperers, a spider in the shadows. King Aerys I named him Hand of the King, and so, the realm was ruled by a king who dreamed of dragons, and a hand who dreamed of control. King's Landing was transformed. It became a police state, a city of whispers and shadows. Bloodraven's network of spies seemed to stretch everywhere. Every brothel, every tavern, every Lord Solar had an informant in it. Men and women vanished in the night, dragged to the dungeons of the Red Keep, or words spoken in what they thought was confidence. The Raven's Teeth walked the streets, their silver and black cloaks a warning to all. It was said that Bloodraven knew your name before you opened your mouth, knew your secrets before you whispered them to your lover. He was a master of shadow magic, binding ravens to his will and seeing through their eyes. Under Bloodraven, the realm was stable, but it was stable through terror. The exiled Blackfires across the narrow sea had not given up their claim. They plotted in the free cities, waiting for a moment of weakness. In 211, a new rebellion was hatched. Daemon II Blackfire, young and charismatic, planned to land in Westeros and raise the dragon banners. He believed the lords of the Reach and the Stormlands were ready to flock to him. He began to move seeking allies, but Bloodraven was always 3 steps ahead. His network was too deep. Daemon II never got the chance to launch his major campaign. He was seized by the crown before his army could gather. The rebellion was crushed before it truly began. The would-be king was captured, and the Blackfire pretenders were scattered once more. It was a masterpiece of preemptive violence. Bloodraven had saved the realm from war, but he had done so by making it a prison. King Aerys I never truly ruled. He died in the year 221, childless, leaving the throne to his brother, Maegor. Maegor was a different breed of king. He was a warrior, a man of action and iron discipline. He had no love for the shadow games of his half-brother, the Bloodraven. The first thing Maegor did as king was to break Bloodraven's power. Brynden Rivers was stripped of his office and sent to the wall to take the black and disappear from the history of the court, but the scars of his rule remained. The throne that Maegor inherited was a throne deeply shaken by plague, by tyranny, and by the legacy of a king who had turned away from the world and into the arms of prophecy. Marka's reign would be a stark contrast, a grim warrior's attempt to restore the dignity of a crown blooded by sickness and shadow. It was a struggle that would define the next generation of Targaryens. The Great Spring Sickness had cut a devastating swath through the 7 kingdoms, leaving entire bloodlines extinct and the small folk desperate. In the wake of this catastrophe, the crown sat upon the head of Aerys I, a king far more interested in ancient prophecies and dusty tomes than the day-to-day rule of his kingdom. It was Brynden Rivers, the Bloodraven, who truly held the reins of power as Hand of the King. But this reign could not last forever. Aerys I died without issue in 221 AC, and the crown passed to his brother, Maegor I. Maegor was a skilled commander and a just man, but he lacked the charisma to heal the deep wounds left by the spring sickness. He spent much of his reign dealing with rebellions sparked by the lingering chaos. His death came unexpectedly at the Siege of Starpike, fighting a rebellious lord. This left the succession in a deeply uncertain state, for Maegor's eldest son, Darren, was a drunkard who had died before him. The crown, after a contentious great council, passed over Maegor's other sons to land upon the head of his fourth son, a man who had once squired for a hedge knight under a secret name, Aegon V, the man who would be known as Aegon the Unlikely. Aegon V came to the throne with a vision few Targaryen kings had ever harboured. He had spent his youth in disguise, travelling the realm as a squire. He had seen the suffering of the small folk firsthand, and did not forget these lessons when the crown was placed upon his head. He enacted a series of populist reforms, unlike any the realm had seen. He sought to curb the excessive powers of the nobility, to give the common people a stronger voice in the king's justice, and to protect them from the whims of their lords. You can imagine how this was received by the High Lords of the Seven Kingdoms. To them, King Aegon was a dangerous radical. They saw his edicts as an attack on their ancient rights and privileges. Aegon V found himself increasingly isolated, his court filled with sullen lords who resented his every decree, his small council a battleground between royal will and noble ambition. As the years passed, a terrible realization began to dawn upon King Aegon. His reforms were failing. The High Lords simply ignored his decrees or found ways to twist them to their own advantage. The small folk continued to suffer, and the king felt the weight of his powerlessness with every failed edict. The crown had lost its teeth. Without the threat of overwhelming force, the king was merely the first among equals, not a true ruler. The memory of the dragons haunted Aegon V. His ancestors had bent entire kingdoms to their will with dragonfire. How could he possibly force the privileged lords of Westeros to accept a more just world without a terror to match their own? The idea began to grow, quietly at first, then with an obsessive force. The dragons had to return. Only with dragons could the crown truly command. Only with dragons could his dreams of a better realm be made real. The Targaryen dynasty had not successfully hatched a dragon since the days of the dance. The eggs remained, beautiful but cold, scattered among the branches of the royal family. Aegon V, his son Prince Duncan the Small, and his heir, Prince Jaehaerys, became consumed with the ancient rituals and lore of dragon hatching. They gathered the finest maesters, pyromancers, and scholars they could find. They pored over forbidden texts, and in the summer of 259 AC, the royal family travelled to the summer palace of Summerhall for what they believed would be a triumph. The exact details of what happened that night are shrouded in ash and mystery. There was a great conflagration. A fire of terrible intensity consumed the palace of Summerhall. The king's eldest son, Prince Duncan the Small, perished in the flames. The king himself, Aegon V, died trying to save him, or perhaps he was the cause of the blaze itself. Sir Duncan the Tall, the Lord Commander of the Kingsguard, who had been the king's closest friend since childhood, died alongside them, as did many others. The attempt to hatch dragons had failed utterly. Instead of restoring the Targaryen dynasty to its former glory, it had broken it. Jaehaerys II, the new king, was a sickly man who reigned for only 3 years. He inherited a court in mourning, a realm suspicious of royal magic, and a dynasty that now seemed cursed rather than blessed. Aegon V's grand experiment was over. The realm was left with a scarred and diminished dynasty. The tragedy at Summerhall had robbed the Targaryens of their most visionary king and left the Iron Throne in the hands of a boy who would have to learn to rule in a world where the dragons were not coming back, or so everyone believed. From the ashes of Summerhall, where Aegon V had perished In a desperate, failed ritual to bring back dragons, the Iron Throne passed to a new generation. Aegon's son, Jaehaerys II, held the crown only briefly before he too succumbed to illness, leaving the realm in the hands of a young man barely out of his teens. That young man was Aerys Targaryen, the second of his name, and the kingdom he inherited was one standing on the precipice of what could have been a golden age. In those early years, Aerys II defied every dark expectation. He was not sullen or cruel. He was energetic, intelligent, and generous. He danced with his knights, he laughed with his lords, and he surrounded himself with talent. His greatest asset, however, was the man he chose as his hand of the king, Tywin Lannister. Where the young king charmed, the Lord of Casterly Rock governed. Tywin Lannister was cold, efficient, and utterly ruthless in the administration of the realm. He restored the crown's finances, he crushed the rebellious houses Rhaen and Tarbeck, and he ensured that for a decade, the Seven Kingdoms knew peace and prosperity. It was a partnership that should have defined an age. The Shining King and the Iron Hand. But cracks were already beginning to form. Aerys grew jealous of Tywin's reputation. He was the king, yet it was Tywin's name that was spoken with fear and respect in the same breath. This resentment festered in the shadows of Aerys's mind, waiting for the right spark to set it ablaze. That spark came in the town of Duskendale. Lord Denys Darklyn, a man of considerable pride, had grown weary of the crown's trade restrictions imposed by Tywin's hand. He closed his gates to the Iron Throne, defying royal authority. Aerys, determined to prove his own strength and envious of Tywin's power, made a fatal decision. He would not send an army. He would not send his hand. He would go himself personally to accept Lord Darklyn's surrender. In a move of staggering naivety and rash courage, the king walked into the trap of Duskendale. He was taken captive, held prisoner in the Dun Fort for half a year. Tywin Lannister surrounded the town, but he could not storm it without risking the king's life. For 6 months, Aerys sat in a damp cell. The isolation, the humiliation, the constant threat of a blade in the dark, it broke something inside him. You can hear the echoes of that breaking in every cruel decree he made afterward. When Tywin finally acted, using the Knight Barristan Selmy to spirit Aerys out, the king was free. But the man who returned to King's Landing was not the same man who had left. The confident prince was gone, replaced by a gaunt, suspicious creature who saw conspiracy in every shadow. The psychological trauma of Duskendale was absolute. Aerys never wore a crown again. He believed it made him a target. He let his hair grow long and matted, his fingernails uncut, becoming a creature of his own filth and fear. He grew deeply suspicious of Tywin Lannister. Did Tywin let him rot in that cell to make himself look stronger? Did Tywin secretly want the crown for himself? Aerys banished his greatest servant from court, taking the son of the Lord of the Seven Kingdoms, Jaime Lannister, as a hostage for his father's good behaviour, naming him to the Kingsguard. This was the death knell for the alliance between the Iron Throne and the great houses of Westeros. If the king could humiliate the Warden of the West so publicly, no lord was safe. Consider what happens to a court when the king trusts no one. The small council meetings became interrogations. Every lord had an agenda. Every knight was a potential assassin. Aerys would grow violent in an instant, his mood swinging from sullen silence to shrieking rage. The Red Keep, once a place of ceremony and song, became a prison of whispers and fear. Around this time, Aerys became obsessed with a singular, terrible goal. He wanted fire. Not just any fire, but wildfire. The Alchemist's Guild, long a relic of a forgotten age, was brought to the forefront of court. Aerys believed that he was the true dragon, that he could command fire. He began to hoard wildfire, massive caches of it, hidden beneath the streets, the sewers, and the great buildings of King's Landing. He would spend hours in the dungeons with the pyromancers, watching the flames, speaking to them. The plan, whispered only in the deepest chambers of the Red Keep, was simple. If the city ever fell, he would burn it all. He would turn the entire capital into a pyre, rather than let his enemies claim it. His paranoia deepened. and it found a new target. His son, Rhaegar. Prince Rhaegar was everything Aerys feared. He was beloved by the small folk, respected by the lords, and there were whispers that he had the manner of a true king. Aerys saw his own son not as an heir but as a rival. He believed that Rhaegar was conspiring with the lords to steal his throne. The tourney at Harrenhal, that grand spectacle of chivalry, became a political powder keg. Rhaegar's decision to name Lyanna Stark the Queen of Love and Beauty, passing over his own wife Elia Martell, was a slight with deeper implications. It was a public rebuke of the Dornish alliance and a very public interest in the north. Aerys, convinced the tourney was a front for a coup, attended unexpectedly, his madness fully on display. He spoke of hearing voices, of the wildfire whispering to him. The realm watched their king descend into a gibbering terror. The final breakdown came with the disappearance of Lyanna Stark. When Brandon Stark rode to King's Landing demanding Rhaegar's blood, Aerys did not act as a king. He acted as a madman. He arrested Brandon, then summoned his father, Rickard Stark, to answer for his son's crimes. In the throne room, the Lord of Winterfell was roasted alive in his own armour, while his son watched, strangled by a Tiroshi Garrote, as he struggled to save him. Aerys, drunk on power and the sight of flame, then sent to the Eyrie, demanding the heads of Robert Baratheon and Eddard Stark from their foster father, Jon Arryn. Jon Arryn refused. He called his banners instead, and in that single decisive refusal, the alliance between the great houses shattered entirely. The North, the Stormlands, the Riverlands, and the Vale rose as one against the throne. The war that had been brewing in Aerys's mind since the dark days of Duskendale had finally become a war of steel and blood. The Mad King had lit the pyre, and now the flames would rise to consume him, his dynasty, and his terrible secret hidden deep beneath the city streets. The song of the dragon would soon be answered by the roar of a stag. The Mad King Aerys II returned from the Defiance of Duskendale, a shattered man. His paranoia transformed the Red Keep into a cage of whispers and suspicion. He trusted no one, not even his own hand. The kingdom teetered on the brink, waiting for a single event to push it over the edge. That event occurred in the Riverlands. Prince Rhaegar Targaryen, the Crown Prince, took Lyanna Stark, the daughter of the Warden of the North. The motives of the prince remain clouded, a matter of speculation rather than certainty. But the consequence was immediate. The North demanded justice. The king responded with madness. Lord Rickard Stark and his son Brandon rode to King's Landing to plead their case before the Iron Throne. Aerys II saw not petitioners, but conspirators. He accused them of treason. In the throne room of the Red Keep, before the fused swords of Aegon, the Conqueror's enemies, the king decreed trial by combat. Rickard Stark, clad in knightly plate, would fight the crown's champion. The champion was fire. Wildfire was ignited beneath the hearth, as the Lord of Winterfell burned alive inside his own armour. Brandon Stark was bound with a leather cord around his neck. A sword was placed on a table just beyond his reach. He strangled himself in a futile attempt to reach his father, the cord digging into his flesh as the flames consumed his lord. The Mad King watched from the Iron Throne, his hands blackened by the same fire he used for murder, laughing as the heir to Winterfell died before him. The very seat of royal justice became a monument to the king's insanity. The realm could not stand for such depravity. Aerys, furious that he had not destroyed the rebel houses entirely, demanded the heads of Robert Baratheon and Eddard Stark from their foster father, Jon Arryn. Jon Arryn refused. He raised his banners in the Vale of Arryn in open defiance. Robert Baratheon raised his in the Stormlands. Eddard Stark raised his in the north. The rebellion had become a war. For 300 years, the Targaryen dynasty had clung to the Iron Throne through the memory of dragonfire and the sheer weight of their conquest. The throne itself was a monument to that philosophy, a seat built from the blades of the defeated to remind the realm that rule belonged to the strongest. But the dragons were gone, and the man who now sat that throne had proven that the dynasty's claim to divine right was hollow. The legend of the throne was founded on the idea that power resides where men believe it resides. No one believed in Aerys II any longer. The Targaryen claim to legitimacy through sheer force had finally run out. The war that followed swept across Westeros. From the towers of the Twins to the fords of the Trident, battles would be fought and blood would be spilled. The rebellion was no longer a simple uprising. It was a war of succession, a war to choose a new king. The Iron Throne waited in King's Landing, empty of true authority, a symbol of a dynasty that had lost its way. The first blood had been drawn, but the war for the throne had only just begun. Robert Baratheon, a giant of a man fueled by fury and the loss of his betrothed, marched his forces north. In the Stormlands, he faced lords loyal to the crown, but at Summerhall, he achieved 3 victories in a single day, turning enemies into allies through his sheer charisma and prowess in battle. Yet, the road to King's Landing was long and treacherous. At Ashford, the might of the Reach fell upon him, forcing Robert to retreat into the Riverlands, wounded and pursued by the hand of the king, Jon Connington. In the town of Stony Sept, Robert hid in the brothels and alleys as royal soldiers searched house by house. The rebel forces, led by Eddard Stark and Jon Arryn, arrived just in time. The Battle of the Bells raged through the streets, a chaotic clash of swords and spears that ended in a decisive rebel victory. Connington was forced to retreat, and the Mad King realised that this was no mere riot, but a threat to his very existence. The climax of the war drew near on the muddy banks of the River Trident. It was here that Prince Rhaegar Targaryen, returning from the south, met Robert Baratheon in single combat. The Crown Prince, clad in black armour adorned with the 3-headed dragon in rubies, fought with graceful precision, but Robert fought with the strength of a man possessed. With a shattering blow of his warhammer, Robert crushed Rhaegar's chest, sending the rubies scattering into the river. The prince fell, and with him the Targaryen dynasty. The final act of the tragedy played out at the gates of King's Landing. Lord Tywin Lannister, who had remained neutral throughout the conflict, arrived with a massive host, claiming to be the king's saviour. The paranoid Aerys opened the gates, only for the Lannister forces to sack the city. In his madness, Aerys ordered his pyromancers to burn the entire city to the ground with wildfire. To save the innocent, and perhaps his own family, Sir Jaime Lannister of the Kingsguard drove his sword through the back of the Mad King, forever earning the name Kingslayer. When Eddard Stark rode into the throne room, he found Jaime Lannister sitting upon the Iron Throne, the body of the Mad King cooling on the floor. The rebellion was over, but the scars it left behind would shape the realm for generations to come. Robert Baratheon would take the throne, but the ghost of the dragon still lingered in the shadows, waiting for its time to return. I hope you're as amazed by this as I am. If you want to stay updated on more content like this, make sure to subscribe and join our community of curious minds. Trust me, what's coming next will challenge everything you thought you knew. The word of the executions in the throne room spread like wildfire. The north erupted, the Riverlands rose. The Stormlands and the Vale remembered their oaths. The rebellion was no longer a quiet whisper in King's Landing. It was a great host marching south. The armies of the rebellion moved with a grim purpose. Eddard Stark brought the north down the King's Road. Hoster Tully gathered the River Lords. Jon Arryn marched from the Eyrie, and Robert Baratheon led the Storm Lords. They converged into a single massive host, a force that numbered some 30 to 40,000 men, and they marched south. Their objective was the capital, but the Trident was the only natural barrier they had to cross. The rebel commanders knew that a direct siege of King's Landing while a royal army remained in the field was folly. They had to force a decisive battle. Rhaegar Targaryen knew it too. He marshalled the might of the Crownlands, the Dornish and the Reach, and he marched north from the capital to meet them. The two armies converged on the Trident, a wide, slow river that separated the war-torn Riverlands from the gates of King's Landing. The royal host waited on the southern bank. Rhaegar led them. He wore black plate armour and across his chest was the three-headed dragon of his house, wrought in rubies and gold. His helm was crowned with a dragon's crest. He was the prince of the realm, the last hope of a dying dynasty. The rebels crossed the river at the ford. They were met with a cacophony of steel. The battle was a chaotic, bloody clash that raged for hours. Or perhaps it felt like hours. The centre of the line broke open when Robert Baratheon himself, swinging a massive spiked warhammer that few other men could even lift, carved his way through the Kingsguard. He had one target. He was looking for Rhaegar. They met on the shallow crossing that would come to be known forever. After as the Ruby Ford, Rhaegar fought valiantly. Rhaegar fought nobly. Rhaegar fought honourably. But Robert was a force of pure, righteous fury. Robert had not seen Rhaegar in years. He had once admired the prince, but that admiration had curdled into a cold and burning hatred. Rhaegar had taken Lyanna Stark, Robert's betrothed, and now, on the banks of the Trident, the two men who had shaped the fate of the realm would finally settle their score. Robert's warhammer rose and fell. Rhaegar's sword could not block the pure, overwhelming strength of the blow. It shattered. The hammer crushed into his chest, driving the rubies from his armour into the river. The current carried them away, along with the life of the prince. He died in the mud of the ford. With their commander dead, the morale of the royalist army collapsed instantly. They had placed their hope in Prince Rhaegar, the king's last hope, and he was gone. The line disintegrated. Lords and knights threw down their swords or fled the field. The remnants of the Targaryen host were broken, scattered to the winds. The rebellion had won. Word of the defeat and the death of his son reached the Red Keep. King Aerys II heard the news and retreated fully into the paranoid madness that had consumed him. He saw enemies everywhere, traitors behind every door. He no longer trusted his own Kingsguard. He trusted only his pyromancers, mainly a man named Rossart. Aerys gave the order that would seal his infamy. The caches of wildfire that had been stockpiled in secret, hidden in the basements and cellars beneath the city, were to be primed. Aerys intended to burn King's Landing to the ground. He would not relinquish his throne alive. He would deny the usurper any prize worth taking. The entire city was to become a pyre. The rebels marched south. King's Landing lay ahead. The city was defended by a small garrison, its gates closed. King Aerys sat in the great hall of the Red Keep, the Iron Throne looming behind him, the jagged steps of the Conqueror's monument rising above. He whispered to his pyromancers. But there were other eyes, watching from the west. Tywin Lannister had sat out the war, watching from his rock in the west. Now, with the battle won, and the dragon's wings clipped by the Trident, he finally decided it was time to act. He raised his banners, a host of 20,000 men, and he marched for the capital. He owed no loyalty to the rebellion. He owed no loyalty to the Mad King. He was coming to the capital to decide which side had won. The fate of the throne rested on his choice. The Iron Throne was empty, waiting. The last dragon was crouched in his hall, whispering his mad prayers to the green fire. The Battle of the Trident was over, but the war was not yet won. Rhaegar Targaryen, the last hope of the Dragon Dynasty, lay dead in the muddy shallows of the river, his chest crushed by Robert Baratheon's warhammer. The rubies that adorned his armour scattered across the ford, washing downstream like drops of blood, dispersing from a fatal wound. Robert himself had been wounded in the duel, but he was alive, and his army was triumphant. Yet rather than march directly on the capital, Robert turned north, riding for the Vale and for Winterfell, driven by a desperate need to find Lyanna Stark. It was a decision born of love, and it placed the final confrontation in the hands of his closest friend and his wardens. Eddard Stark and Hoster Tully marched south, their banners united, the last Targaryen loyalists melting away before them. The road to King's Landing lay open and unguarded, and there was another army moving on the capital. Lord Tywin Lannister, the most powerful lord in the Seven Kingdoms, had kept his forces at Harrenhal throughout the war, a silent golden colossus waiting to see which way the wind would blow. He had not lifted a finger when the Riverlands burned, nor when the Trident had run red with the blood of 10,000 men. He waited. When the ravens brought him the news of Rhaegar's defeat, the Lord of Casterly Rock made his decision. He marched his host, a force of nearly 20,000 men, down the causeway toward King's Landing. He sent riders ahead, bearing messages of loyalty to the Iron Throne. He was coming to defend the city against the rebel hordes. Inside the Red Keep, the Mad King Aerys II heard the news of Tywin's approach and laughed. For years he had feared Tywin Lannister. He had insulted him, stolen his heir, mocked his wife. He believed Tywin was plotting against him. But now, in his deepening isolation and madness, Aerys convinced himself that Tywin had returned to prove his loyalty. The king commanded the gates of the city to be opened. He ordered a feast prepared. He believed the lion had come to save the dragon. He was wrong. When the gates of King's Landing swung open to admit the Lannister army, the city's small folk cheered. They saw the crimson banners with the golden lion, and they believed their deliverance had arrived. The Lannister men poured into the streets, and then the cheering stopped. The slaughter began. The sack of King's Landing was one of the most brutal events in the history of Westeros. The Lannister army did not stop to secure the gates or the walls. They spread through the city, looting, raping, and murdering. The innocent and the guilty alike fell before the lion's paw. No house was safe, no temple was sacred. The streets ran red with blood, and the air thickened with smoke and the copper smell of violence. But Lord Tywin was a master of political warfare. While his army sacked the city, he dispatched his most brutal agents to the Tower of the Hand, where Princess Elia of Dorne and her children were residing. The children of Rhaegar Targaryen were the greatest threat to the New Order. As long as they lived, they were a focus for rebellion. They had to die. The task fell to Sir Gregor Clegane, the Mountain That Rides, and Ser Amory Lorch. They broke into the tower. Sir Amory found Rhaenys Targaryen, a little girl of 3 or 4 years old, hiding beneath her father's bed. He dragged her out and stabbed her repeatedly until she was silent. The Mountain found Elia Martell and the infant Aegon. He dashed the child's head against a stone wall, painting the nursery red, and then he murdered the Princess of Dorne. They presented the bodies to Lord Tywin, wrapped in Lannister cloaks. The message was clear. The Targaryen line was broken. The new dynasty would be bound to this act of horror, forever complicit in the blood of innocents. When Eddard Stark arrived in the city, he found the bodies of the children and the princess, and he was filled with a cold fury that never truly left him. He demanded that their killers be punished. Robert Baratheon, when he finally arrived, accepted the gifts of blood with a heavy heart. The throne was won, but it was won on the backs of butchered infants. Inside the Red Keep itself, a final act of the rebellion was drawing to a close. Sir Jaime Lannister, the son of the Lord of Casterly Rock, was the only Kingsguard present with the king. Aerys was seated on the Iron Throne, a mad shadow of a monarch. He had summoned his pyromancers. He had ordered caches of wildfire placed throughout the city. And now, in his final madness, he had given the command to Grand Maester Pycelle and the pyromancer Rossart to ignite the city. He intended to burn King's Landing to ash, to deny Robert his prize, to become a dragon of ash and fury. Jaime Lannister saw the pyromancer leaving the throne room. He followed him, and he killed him. He knew what the command meant. He returned to the throne room. The Mad King sat on his throne, screaming. He ordered Jaime to kill his father, to burn them all. Jaime looked at the king. He remembered his oath to the Kingsguard, to protect the king, and he remembered the thousands of innocent souls in the city below. He drew his sword. The king tried to flee, stumbling from the throne. Jaime stabbed him in the back. Aerys II, the Mad King, the last king of the Targaryen dynasty to sit the Iron Throne as a born ruler, died in the throne room, his blood pooling at the foot of the Great Chair of Swords. Jaime Lannister then sat upon the Iron Throne. The seat was cold, and the blades of the 1,000 swords that formed it dug into his back and thighs. He sat there waiting, his bloody sword resting across his knees. He stared at the body of the king he had sworn to protect. He heard the screams of the sack echoing from outside the hall. He did not know if he was a hero or a traitor. When the doors to the hall burst open and Eddard Stark entered, Jaime looked up. Ned Stark's face was a mask of stone and ice. He looked at the dead king. He looked at the blood on Jaime's hands. And he looked at the Lannister boy, sitting in the throne that was meant for his friend. "You were sworn to protect him," Ned said, his voice filled with a cold disgust. "I was," Jaime replied. Eddard Stark ordered him to rise. The title he earned in that moment, Kingslayer, was not a badge of honour. It was a brand. The rebellion was over. Robert Baratheon was king. The Iron Throne had passed from the dragon to the stag, but the transition was drenched in blood. The bodies of Elia Martell and her children were a stain on Robert's reign from its very first days. The sack of the city had shattered any hope of a peaceful transition, and the murder of the king by his own sworn shield had created a wound in the very concept of honour and knighthood that would fester for decades to come. The new king had won his throne, but the Iron Throne, forged in the fires of conquest, now rested on a foundation of ash, wildfire, and broken oaths, a warning to all who would claim it. Casterly Rock and the golden banners of Lannister had filled the streets of King's Landing. The rebel army stood amidst the aftermath of a city given over to slaughter. Lord Tywin Lannister had presented his proof of loyalty, not with oaths, but with the broken bodies of Elia Martell, her daughter Rhaenys, and her son Aegon, wrapped in Lannister cloaks. He laid them at the foot of the Iron Throne, a gift of blood for the new king. Ned Stark looked upon the dead children and saw the dark road the rebellion had taken. He argued with Robert on the very steps of the throne room, a bitter argument that severed the closeness that they had forged in war. When it was done, Ned gathered his northern men and rode south to lift the siege at Storm's End, and then further into the Dornish mountains to the Tower of Joy. He wanted no part of what came next. But for Robert Baratheon, the path forward was singular. He had won the war. He had crushed the dragon's pride. He had shattered the Targaryen hold on the Seven Kingdoms. Now he had to claim the seat. The Iron Throne sat in the shadows of the Great Hall, a twisted monument of 1,000 swords. The throne Aegon the Conqueror had forged with dragonfire from the blades of his defeated enemies. A chair of jagged, cruel edges, designed to be as unforgiving as the absolute power it represented. Robert Baratheon walked the length of that hall in his battle-worn plate. The scars of the Trident were still fresh. His antlered helm was tucked under his arm. He passed the Lannister guards, the silent remnants of the Kingsguard, and Jon Arryn standing grim-faced beside the dais. He did not kneel. He did not pray. He climbed the steep iron steps and sat. Let us be precise about the nature of his claim. Robert Baratheon was not a usurper in the sense of being a commoner who stole a throne. His grandmother, Rhael Targaryen, was the daughter of King Aegon V. She had been wed to Lord Ormond Baratheon to seal an alliance. When the male line of the Targaryens was extinguished with the deaths of Aerys, Rhaegar and the infant Aegon, Robert had the clearest blood tie to the crown amongst the rebel lords. But let us not mince words. That bloodline was a courtesy, a veneer of royal legitimacy, painted over a foundation of naked conquest. Robert was king because he had smashed Rhaegar Targaryen into the mud of the Trident. The dragon's blood was a ribbon tied around the conqueror's sword to satisfy the maesters and the lords of the south, who needed a legal pretense to bend the knee. His coronation was held in the great sept of Baelor. The High Septon placed the crown of Aegon the Conqueror upon his brow, a circlet of Valyrian steel and rubies, the same crown the Targaryen kings had worn for 3 centuries. It was a masterful piece of political theatre, the usurper wearing the crown of the central authority he had destroyed, signalling a continuation of order rather than the chaos of a complete upheaval. When he sat the Iron Throne for the first time, Robert cut his hand on a jagged blade. The flesh parted, blood dripped onto the iron steps. Some whispered it was a bad omen, a sign that the throne would never accept a false king. Others saw it as a fitting baptism a warrior king bleeding for his seat of power. Robert himself merely laughed, a booming sound in the silent hall, and held up his bloody palm for all to see. To him, it was a trivial wound on the road to a glorious prize. The war was over. He had won, but victory and a crown are never enough to rule the Seven Kingdoms. A kingdom is a living network of debts, alliances, and loyalties. Robert's strongest general was Ned Stark, but Ned had ridden away. His closest advisor was Jon Arryn, the man who had raised him, a falcon of unlimited patience and stern morality. But even a realm run on honour and friendship requires gold, and the gold of Westeros came from the mines of Casterly Rock. Lord Tywin Lannister had held his forces back from the war, watching from the banks of the Red Fork. He committed to Robert only when the outcome was already sealed. He delivered the capital in a single brutal night. The sack of King's Landing was his price of admission, and now he demanded his reward. The price was a bond between houses. The price was the hand of his daughter, Cersei, in marriage. Cersei Lannister was young, barely a woman. She was beautiful, golden, and as proud as the lion of her sigil. She had dreamed of Rhaegar Targaryen, of being a dragon queen. But Rhaegar was dead, and Robert Baratheon was the man who had killed him. Her father told her she would be queen. There was no love in the match. Robert's heart had been buried in the crypts of Winterfell, but Lyanna Stark was gone, and a king needs an heir. He agreed to the union. The wedding in the Great Sept was a spectacle of gold and crimson. The new queen wore a gown of white silk and Myrish lace, sewn with pearls. Robert was drunk by the time the vows were spoken. On their wedding night, legend holds that Robert stumbled into the bedchamber, reeking of wine, called out a single name, Lyanna. Cersei Lannister never forgot that insult. The marriage was a political triumph that bound the crown to the richest house in the realm, but it forged a personal prison of cold silence, resentment, and growing cruelty. In the years that followed, the small council became the true seat of power. Jon Arryn's hand, weaving the political order, Grand Maester Pycelle, a Lannister creature in a chain of office, and a mercurial, unassuming master of coin from the fingers, Petyr Baelish, a man with a genius for creating wealth from promises and debt. The realm had bled during the war. The treasury was left in ruins by the Mad King's hoarding. A new king must project strength, and so the first years of Robert's reign were a cascade of lavish spectacle. Grand tournaments in King's Landing, where the finest knights of the Reach clashed with the veterans of the Trident. The melees were legendary, feasts that lasted for a fortnight, where the wine flowed like the Blackwater, and the tables groaned under the weight of roasted aurochs and swan. Robert presided over all of it, a giant in his prime, his laugh echoing across the tourney grounds, a tankard always in his hand. He was the warrior king, beloved by the commons, admired by the lords. But beneath the revelry, the realm was bleeding gold. The treasury was empty. The tourney at Lannisport and the endless feasts were financed entirely with borrowed coin. The Iron Bank of Braavos, the Faith of the Seven, and the great houses all held notes on the crown. The royal debt began to mount. 3 million gold dragons, then 6 million. The entire realm floated on a sea of credit, an illusion of prosperity managed by the quiet genius of Littlefinger. The king's peace was held together by a web of loans. Robert himself began to fade. The war had been the defining glory of his life. When the fighting ended, the peace felt hollow. He had no enemies left to strike. He turned to the hunt, to the deep woods of the Kingswood. He turned to the bottle, and to the beds of countless women. He ignored his queen. Cersei built her defences around herself, finding comfort and power in the arms of her twin brother Jaime. A secret that would one day tear the kingdom apart. The dynasty was seated, but its foundations were hollow and rotting, and beyond the walls of the Red Keep, the realm was not truly at peace. Beneath the clamour of the tourneys, the quiet resentment of the defeated festered, like an unhealed wound. In dawn, Prince Doran Martell sat in the water gardens, watching his paramour's children play in the pools. His face was a mask of patience. He had lost his sister Elia and her children, to the savagery of Tywin Lannister's bannermen. Robert Baratheon had accepted their deaths as a grim necessity of war. He had wed the daughter of the man who ordered the killings. He had not punished the murderers. He had not offered a single apology to Dorne. The son of House Martell burned with a cold, inexorable fire. They did not forget. They did not forgive. They waited for their moment, planting seeds of vengeance that would take years to bloom. In the Reach, the Tyrells had flown the three-headed dragon until the very end of the war. The siege of Storm's End was lifted only by the arrival of Ned Stark. Mace Tyrell bent the knee to Robert at Highgarden, but his was a sullen submission. They had been the wardens of the South under the dragons, and they chafed under the rule of a Storm Lord. They waited for a better offer, and across the narrow sea, the last embers of the dragon still smouldered. The children of King Aerys, Viserys and Daenerys Targaryen, had been smuggled from Dragonstone by Sir Willem Darry in the final hours of the sack. They were exiles now, wandering from free city to free city. They were the beggar king and his little sister, living on the charity of magisters and the fading glory of a fallen dynasty. Viserys grew sharp and brittle with every refusal, feeding on the delusion that a Dothraki horde would win him back his father's throne. Daenerys grew up in the shadow of his obsession, fearing the day her brother would sell her for an army. The loyalists of the dragon watched. They saw Robert grow fat on debt and wine. They saw the cracks in the Baratheon dynasty. They saw a king who was already dying inside his own victory. The usurper's coronation was not the end of the story of the Iron Throne. It was merely the turning of the page. The throne sat in the Red Keep, jagged and waiting, a constant reminder that power is a treacherous seat. Robert Baratheon occupied the throne, but he never truly mastered it. The realm enjoyed a fragile peace, a facade of prosperity built on borrowed time and borrowed coin. The summer was long and golden and full of laughter, but steady beneath the sound of the tawny horns. The wind was turning, and far away across the sunset sea, a dragon's egg waited to hatch. Robert Baratheon had won the Iron Throne through the force of his warhammer and the strength of his alliances, winning a crown he never truly wanted. The long summer of his reign was a hollow golden age, a facade of peace that masked a rotting foundation. He filled the Red Keep with drunkards and jesters, his only solace the thrill of the hunt and the bottom of a wine cup. He left the true business of ruling to the Lannisters. His marriage to Cersei Lannister was a contract sealed in blood and gold, a cold union that soured with every passing year. Cersei gave him 3 children, Joffrey, Myrcella and Tommen. As the years passed, a careful observer might have noticed a glaring inconsistency buried in plain sight. The seed of Baratheon was strong, dark of hair and fierce of brow, a trait that had endured across generations, from the first Storm King to Robert himself. But the royal children in the Red Keep looked nothing like their father. They were golden lions, perfect copies of their mother, her twin brother, Jaime. This truth was a shadow that clung to the throne, a secret that waited patiently in the depths of a dusty book in the castle library. When Jon Arryn, the Hand of the King, died suddenly, Robert rode north to Winterfell to recruit his oldest and most trusted friend, Ned Stark. He offered Ned a position he could not refuse. Lord of Winterfell, Eddard Stark, became the Hand of the King. Ned, a man of honour in a city of liars, arrived in King's Landing with his daughters Sansa and Arya, ready to serve his king. But he was immediately drawn into the mystery of Jon Arryn's death. He followed the trail into that heavy, leather-bound tome of lineages, a book recording the marriages and children of the great houses for centuries. He flipped through the pages, tracing the line of Baratheon from the first Storm King, Aegon Duncan Ryle. Every true-born Baratheon who had lived since the time of the conquest had the black hair. The seed is strong, Jon Arryn had whispered before he died. The truth was undeniable. Robert had no true-born children. Joffrey was a bastard born of incest. The heir to the Iron Throne was a lie. The very foundation of the Baratheon dynasty was a lie built on sand. Ned confronted Cersei in the gardens of the Red Keep. showing her the proof and giving her one last chance to flee, to protect her children from the wrath of her husband. But before he could deliver the full truth to the king, Robert was gored by a wild boar on a hunt in the Kingswood. He died slowly, painfully, his final words a drunken confession of his failures, and a desperate plea for Ned to be regent until his heir came of age. The throne was already lost to a lie, and the king who had built the new dynasty was dead. Cersei did not flee. She struck first. Robert's last testament was torn apart. Joffrey was proclaimed king before Robert's body was even cold in the ground. Ned Stark, betrayed by the man he trusted most, Petyr Baelish, was seized the throne room and cast into the black cells beneath the Red Keep. From the darkness, he could hear the bells of the city ringing for a new king, to save his daughters from the fury of the lions. Ned confessed to an imagined conspiracy, to plotting to steal the throne, hoping to be banished to the wall in disgrace. But Joffrey, a boy of 13, who had learned cruelty from his mother and from his own vicious nature, demanded the ultimate spectacle. He ordered the swordsman Sir Eilen Payne to swing the great sword ice. Ned Stark was executed in the plaza before the great sept of Baelor. Sansa screamed. Arya was dragged away by Yoren of the Night's Watch. The crowd cheered. The head of the rebellion that had placed Robert on the throne was severed from his body in a single clean stroke. The realm watched, and the realm broke in two. In the north, word spread like wildfire through the snow. The Stark bannermen descended on Winterfell, each lord a legend in his own right, united in their fury. They did not want a regent. They did not want to bend the knee to a boy king who had murdered their liege lord in cold blood. They wanted a king. They proclaimed Robb Stark the king in the north, a title that had not been heard since Torrhen Stark bent the knee to Aegon the Conqueror. A crown of bronze and iron, ancient and simple, was placed upon his head. The North had declared its independence, a breaking of the pact that had held the realm together for 3 centuries. Theon Greyjoy, Ned's ward, was sent to the Iron Islands to secure an alliance with his estranged father. There, Lord Balon Greyjoy had already seen his opportunity. He had spent the years since his rebellion plotting and nursing his hatred for the Green Lands. He declared himself King of the Isles and the North, reviving the older kingdom of the Ironborn. He saw the chaos of the mainland as a perfect chance to reclaim the old ways of reaving and raiding. The realm of the Iron Throne was hemorrhaging territory from every corner, its strength bleeding out into the snow and the sea. Meanwhile, the Baratheon brothers prepared for war. Stannis, the Lord of Dragonstone, the elder of the two, saw himself as the only true king by law. He knew the secret of Cersei's children. He issued a letter to every corner of the realm, laying out the incest and the illegitimacy in cold, undeniable terms. He demanded Joffrey be cast down and the realm rally behind him. He was the rightful heir by every law of succession. He was a grim and just man, a master of the sea, and he believed deeply that justice alone would be enough to win the throne. Renly, the younger brother, embodied the opposite. He was the summer, the beauty, the charisma. He gathered the might of the Reach and the Stormlands, the largest army seen in Westeros since the conquest. He married Margaery Tyrell for her armies and her beauty, and he prepared to take the throne by sheer overwhelming force. He did not claim the crown by law, but by power. Renly laughed at Stannis' claim of right. What is law compared to 100,000 swords? He had the steel, he had the gold, he had the most beautiful woman in the realm as his queen. He was the future, or so we believed. Stannis retreated to Dragonstone, brooding on his rights, calling on the loyalty of the banners, and finding few answers. Renly marched, his army stretching from horizon to horizon, a vision of victory that was too bright and perfect to last. So the 7 kingdoms did not have one king. They had 5. Joffrey the Cruel in King's Landing, guarded by the Lannister armies and the gold of Casterly Rock. Stannis at Dragonstone, brooding and righteous, his fleet waiting for the wind. Renly at Bitterbridge, marching with pageantry and power toward the capital. Robb Stark, the young wolf, crossing the neck into the Riverlands to free his father's lands from the lion's grip, and Balon Greyjoy, the kraken risen from the sea, striking at the undefended western shores. The great game for the Iron Throne had become a free-for-all. The wheel of power began to turn. The first blood of this war was not drawn by a charging knight or a shining king. It was drawn by the wolves of Winterfell in the Whispering Wood, where the young wolf Robb Stark sprang his trap on Jaime Lannister. The first clash of steel echoed across the Trident. The Riverlands began to burn. The War of the Five Kings had truly begun, and the Iron Throne sat cold and empty in the great hall of the Red Keep, waiting for the next tide of blood to wash over its jagged steps. The execution of Eddard Stark was meant to cauterize the wound of rebellion. Instead, it infected the entire body of the realm. The North declared for Robb. Renly Baratheon crowned himself in the Reach. Balon Greyjoy raised his longships, and on Dragonstone, Stannis Baratheon prepared his claim. He would not waste his strength in a war of attrition across the continent. He would strike directly at the heart of the beast. He would take the Iron Throne in a single decisive blow. The Battle of the Blackwater began not with a declaration, but with a fleet. The Royal Navy, anchored in the estuary, was a shadow of its former strength. Stannis, a master of the sea, had built a new armada, the largest in centuries. A forest of masts bearing the fiery heart of his god. They swept into the Blackwater rush and fell upon the king's ships. The defence of the city rested on Tyrion Lannister, a man the realm dismissed as a monster. He knew the royal ships were doomed in a straight fight. His plan was desperate. Beneath the river's surface, a massive iron chain lay hidden, ready to close like a trap, and secreted in the depths were dozens of pots filled with wildfire, the alchemist's sickly green fire. The royal ships engaged Stannis' vanguard and feigned a retreat. The enemy took the bait, crowding into the channel. The chain rose from the water, sealing their fate. A single flaming arrow. The river erupted. It did not simply burn. It became a sea of green chemical flame. The heat melted the flesh from bones. The water itself was a weapon. Stannis' mighty fleet was consumed in a single, horrifying moment. The wildfire had devastated the fleet, but Stannis himself was ashore. His knights were at the gates of the capital. The assault on the Mudgate was ferocious. Tyrion, wounded in the face during a desperate sortie, led the defence, but the weight of the attack was immense. The city seemed lost. The throne would fall, and then the horns sounded from the west. Tywin Lannister had not marched south to fight the young wolf. He had marched to break the siege of King's Landing, and he had brought a new ally. Petyr Baelish had played his greatest gambit. He had united the might of the Reach with the cause of the Iron Throne. The Lannister Tyrell army, fresh and glittering with summer steel, fell upon Stannis' flank. The siege shattered in an instant. The Stormlanders were crushed between the city walls and the combined host. Stannis himself was forced to flee the field. His ambition turned to ash. Joffrey Baratheon emerged from the Red Keep to claim the victory. He had hidden during the battle, but he walked out as a warrior king. To cement the miracle, he was betrothed to Margaery Tyrell, the beautiful Rose of Highgarden. The city celebrated. Joffrey consolidated his power, believing his rule absolute. He showered gifts upon the Tyrells. He held grand feasts. He believed the realm was his. But the victory was a gilded shell. Joffrey was blind to the rot within his own court. He did not see that his grandfather Tywin held the true power. He did not see that his mother Cersei would destroy anyone to protect her own influence. He did not see that the Tyrells were not loyal to him, but to the throne itself. Margaery Tyrell was a player, not a pawn. She began to charm the court, weaving a web of influence around the boy king. The rot beneath the gilded surface of the Red Keep was already spreading. The alliance that had saved the throne was built on ambition, not loyalty. The court settled into an uneasy peace, a cold that preceded the true winter, and sitting at the heart of it all, high above the schemers, the Iron Throne waited. It had witnessed murder, madness and fire. It had survived the Blackwater, and it waited for a wedding. The Game of Thrones was far from over. The royal wedding of King Joffrey to Margaery Tyrell was meant to be the grandest spectacle the Seven Kingdoms had ever seen, a celebration of Lannister dominance and Tyrell wealth. Guests poured into the capital from every corner of Westeros, bringing with them smiles that masked ancient grudges. Among them was Prince Oberyn Martell of Dorne, a man whose thirst for vengeance against the Lannisters was as famous as his deadly skill with a spear. His presence added a volatile spark to an already combustible court. As the feast began, the air in the Great Hall was thick with tension, hidden behind the laughter of lords and ladies. Joffrey, bloated with pride and cruelty, took pleasure in tormenting his uncle Tyrion before the entire court. But the king's triumph would be short-lived. A single cup of poisoned wine, a sudden gasp for air, and the boy king lay dead on the floor, his face turning a horrific shade of purple. The alliance that had saved King's Landing was instantly fractured by suspicion and grief. Tyrion Lannister was arrested for the murder, accused by his own sister, Cersei. The trial that followed would tear the family apart, exposing the deep wounds of the House of Lannister to the entire world. Once again, the throne sat empty, waiting for another king to claim its heavy burden. While the shadows of war lengthened across the land, the wildfire burned green on the Blackwater, and Stannis Baratheon's fleet was broken against the mud and the chain. King's Landing breathed again, though the air was thick with ash and the smell of roasted flesh. The crown, battered but intact, owed its survival to the very dwarf its queen mother despised. Tyrion Lannister had saved the city, but for the Lannisters, saving the city did not mean keeping it, and in the heart of the Red Keep, a darker game was already being prepared. The sun was bright over the capital. The bells of the Great Sept of Baelor rang out across every district, a sound of celebration meant to wash away the memory of war. It was meant to be a new beginning. The king was taking a bride. The Tyrells had filled the city with flowers. Roses covered the stones, covering the cracks, covering the blood. The smell of Highgarden was supposed to mask the smell of the city, the smell of the ghettos, the smell of the dead. Joffrey loved it all. He adored the pageantry. He saw himself as a king from the songs, a young conqueror at the height of his power. The wedding itself was a spectacle of obscene wealth, a declaration that the Lannisters were here to stay. The sept was decked in gold and crimson, and the feast that followed in the Great Hall was a parade of excess, pies the size of wagons, 100 courses, wines from the Arbor and the Reach. Joffrey in his finest hour was at his most monstrous. The crown sat easily on his head now, but it had not softened him. He forced his uncle Tyrion to act as his cupbearer, a public humiliation designed to remind the court that the imp was a Lannister in name only. He made a mockery of the wedding joust, using dwarfs painted as lions and stags to reenact the war. The hall laughed, but it was a nervous laugh, and then the pie was served. A magnificent creation, a giant construction of crust and sugar, carved to look like the Red Keep. Joffrey, impatient and cruel, demanded his uncle taste the wine. Tyrion complied. He watched the king, and then the king cut the pie. He took a piece, raised it to his lips, and laughed. The laughter turned to a cough, a thick, wet cough. He pounded on his chest. The crowd laughed at first. They thought it was a jape. The king was a cruel boy. They assumed he was mocking someone, but his face was changing. The pale golden hair was soaked with sweat. His eyes bulged. He could not breathe. He stumbled forward, knocking over the table. The pie spilled across the floor in a mess of pastry and wine. The shocking poisoning of King Joffrey at his own wedding feast brought the hall to a screaming halt. He fell to the floor, thrashing, clawing at his throat, his face turning a deep bruised purple. Cersei's wails echoed off the stone. A mother's grief turned instantly into a serpent's rage. The boy king died on the floor of his own wedding feast, surrounded by the wreckage of his own celebration. It was not a death befitting a king. It was a death befitting a monster. The cup was still in Tyrion's hands. There was no trial, not then. Only the accusation of a grieving queen, who needed someone to blame. The trial of Tyrion Lannister became the centerpiece of the Capital's next season. It was not a search for truth, it was a performance. Cersei's hatred for her brother, long simmering, now had a focus. The escalation of internal Lannister conflicts reached its peak in that great hall. Lord Tywin, the father of the realm, presided over the proceedings. He could have stopped it. He had the power to dismiss the charges. He did not. The evidence was flimsy, but the story was powerful. The dwarf hated the king. The dwarf had threatened the king. The dwarf was a monster. Witness after witness took the stand to bury him, but the deepest cut came from Shae. The woman he loved, the woman he had saved from the very city they were in, took the stand. She lied. She called him a liar and a killer. She painted a picture of a man consumed by hate and jealousy. Tyrion, betrayed by everyone he had ever loved, looked at his father, looked at his sister, and saw the faces of his enemies. He broke. He demanded a trial by combat. His champion was Prince Oberyn Martell of Dorne. The Red Viper had come to the capital not for justice for the imp, but for vengeance for his sister Elia. The mountain was Cersei's champion. The duel was brutal. It was stunning. Oberyn was faster, more skilled. He had Gregor Clegane beaten. He had him on his back. But he wanted a confession. He wanted to hear the words. He wanted Tywin Lannister to hear the truth. And in that moment of hubris, the mountain took him. A great fist closed around his skull. The teeth were crushed into bone. The head was smashed into pulp. Tyrion's hope died with the Dornish prince on the stones of the throne room. While Tyrion rotted in a cell, a new king was crowned. The coronation of the young, malleable Tommen Baratheon was a quiet affair. Tommen was everything Joffrey was not. He was sweet. He was kind. He liked to pet his cats and sign the papers his mother put in front of him. The crown was too big for his head, and everyone knew it. When the Septon placed the crown of Aegon, the Conqueror, upon his brow, he looked afraid. He was so young, and his influence was immediately controlled by his bride, Margaery Tyrell. She was gentle with him. She was kind. She took his hand and whispered in his ear. The Tyrell ambition was absolute. Tommen was theirs to shape. Cersei watched from the side, a lioness who had lost her cub and found her power stripped away. The dungeon was damp. The straw was cold. Tyrion waited for death. He dreamed of Tysha. He dreamed of the girl he thought he had bought. The girl who had loved him. The girl his father had taken away. Jaime Lannister came in the night. He had the keys. He had a plan. He also had the truth. Tysha was not a whore. She was a crofter's daughter. She had loved him truly. Their father had lied. The world Tyrion believed in collapsed in that moment. He took the secret passageways up through the rock of the Red Keep. He knew exactly where he was going. The escape of Tyrion after murdering his father, Tywin, is one of the most consequential moments in the history of the Iron Throne. He found his father in the Tower of the Hand, not in his solar, but in his chambers. Shae was in his bed. Tyrion strangled her with the hand of the king's chain. Then he found Tywin. His father was in the privy. The crossbow was on the floor. Tyrion raised it. Tywin tried to buy him off. He tried to reason. Tyrion gave him the same justice his father had given him. A crossbow bolt to the gut. The great lion of Casterly Rock bled out on the cold stone floor of the privy. He bled out alone. The man who had held the Seven Kingdoms together by the sheer force of his will was dead by the hand of his own despised son. The escape of Tyrion left the crown without its chief strategist. The crown was adrift. Tywin Lannister had been the rock upon which the regime was built. Without him, the Lannister banner would hold for a time. But the cracks were already spreading. Cersei was a queen regent without a king to control. Tommen was a puppet. The Tyrells were pulling the strings. And across the narrow sea, a woman with 3 dragons was gathering an army of Unsullied and a fleet of Ironborn. The Iron Throne had lost its king, its hand and its head. The swords of Aegon's conquest, the blades of 1,000 defeated enemies, held their silent vigil over an empty hall. The throne remained, sharp, waiting. The poison that killed King Joffrey at his wedding feast did not just end a monstrous reign, it shattered the fragile truce between the two most powerful houses in the Seven Kingdoms. The Lannisters and the Tyrells had maintained a delicate partnership bound by blood and political convenience, but with Joffrey dead, that bond frayed into open suspicion and hostility. Margaery Tyrell was now betrothed to the much younger and far more pliable Tommen. The Queen of Thorns had fled the capital, and Tyrion Lannister sat in a dungeon awaiting trial for a crime he did not commit. For Cersei Lannister, this chaos looked like an opportunity. Her enemies were everywhere. Margaery Tyrell was winning the love of the small folk and the trust of her son, positioning herself to be the true power behind the throne. Their father, Tywin Lannister, was tightening his iron grip on the realm, and creeping into the city was a force that no one in the Red Keep had taken seriously until it was far too late. A tide of ragged, emaciated commoners known as the Sparrows. The Sparrows were a movement born from the absolute devastation of the War of the Five Kings. They were farmers, merchants, and mothers who had their families destroyed by the endless slaughter. They had lost everything to the armies of the Lannisters, the Starks, the Baratheons, and the Greyjoys. They turned their suffering into a religious crusade. They marched on King's Landing to demand justice from a corrupt crown and an even more corrupt clergy. They dragged the High Septon, a man of sybaritic comfort, from the streets and beat him bloody. In this, Cersei saw her weapon. She could not legally touch Margaery Cherry herself without risking open war with Highgarden. She could not publicly defy her father without destroying her own power base. But the faith of the Seven was an ancient authority she could potentially wield. The crown was deeply in debt to the faith. To absolve this debt and to gain a dedicated military force loyal only to her, Cersei convinced her son, King Tommen, to restore the faith militant. This was the ancient order of the Warriors' Sons and the Poor Fellows, organizations disbanded by King Maegor the Cruel centuries ago for their rebelliousness. She rearmed the faith of the Seven. She handed them a charter to judge the morality of the court. She believed she was putting a leash on a rabid dog and aiming it at her rivals. In reality, she was handing the dog the leash and offering her own throat. The man who rose to lead this new order called himself the High Sparrow. He was not a grand lord playing at piety. He was a true believer, as hard and cold as the stone of the sept he now occupied. Cersei believed she could manipulate him with promises of gold and influence. But the High Sparrow possessed a different kind of weapon, pure, unassailable moral authority, immediately backed by the sword she herself had provided. The moment the crown rearmed the faith, the delicate balance of power in King's Landing evaporated. The High Sparrow did not just accept his new role, he immediately seized complete moral and political authority over the city. He arrested the deposed High Septon and threw him in the black cells. He opened the gates of the Great Sept to the homeless, the hungry, and the displaced, building an army of fanatical devotees. He began investigating the sins of the royal court, and he did not discriminate between the friends and the foes of House Lannister. The royal court had expected a puppet. Instead, they had empowered a singularly fearsome tyrant. The High Sparrow's justice was swift and terrifyingly equal. First, he arrested Margaery Tyrell. The charges were perjury and high treason, for she had lied to the faith about the consummation of her marriage to the late King Joffrey. Margaery Tyrell was thrown into a grim cell. The power of the Tyrells meant nothing inside the walls of the Sept. Cersei watched her rival fall with barely concealed satisfaction. The Tyrells were helpless. The king was helpless. But then, the High Sparrow came for Cersei herself. Using the detailed testimony of her own cousin and former lover, Lancel Lannister, he had the Queen Regent arrested on charges of regicide, incest, and high treason. The woman who had unleashed this power was now its most prominent and humiliated victim. The arrest of both Cersei Lannister and Margaery Tyrell was the public humiliation of the entire royal house. The crown, which was supposed to be the supreme temporal authority in the realm, was powerless to stop it. This was the complete and total breakdown of royal authority. The boy king, Tommen Baratheon, was utterly isolated, a prisoner in his own castle, psychologically manipulated by the High Sparrow. His mother was in chains. The royal court was exposed as a den of sin and corruption. The Tyrell army was encamped outside the city gates, but could not storm the Sept without guaranteeing the execution of their own queen. The Lannister army was commanded by Jaime Lannister, who was himself humiliated and driven from the capital. The crown was no longer in charge. The realm was now governed by religious zealots. The king knelt to the High Sparrow. The queen was marched through the streets in a gown of shame. Cersei Lannister's last desperate gambit to cling to power had resulted in the exact opposite of what she intended. She had sought to control her rivals and eliminate Margaery. She had instead made the crown entirely subservient to the faith. Imprisoned in the great Sept of Baelor, stripped of her gowns and her authority, Cersei Lannister listened to the hymns of the faithful. The High Sparrow demanded a full confession. A trial was set. The faith wanted her blood. Her father was dead. Her lover was gone. Her children were either puppets or corpses. She had only one path left to her, a path of fire, subterfuge, and absolute destruction. The High Sparrow had arrested the Queen. He had humbled the crown. But he had forgotten the oldest lesson of the pit. Caged lions, when they have nothing left to lose, do not simply accept their fate. They tear down the cage, even if it means burning down the entire world alongside them. Power is not a game. That is a lesson Cersei Lannister learned in the dirt, naked and bleeding, while the faithful threw filth at her skin. But she also learned another lesson in that moment, one far more dangerous for the realm. She learned that mercy is a weakness she would never repeat. When the High Sparrow thought he had won, when he held the Queen Mother and the Queen, Margaery Tyrell, captive within the walls of the great Sept of Baelor, he walked directly into a trap that had been laid decades before he ever took his first breath of authority. The wildfire was always there. It had been secreted beneath the city by the Mad King Aerys, a monument to his paranoia, meant to burn King's Landing to the ground, rather than let it fall to Robert Baratheon. Tyrion Lannister had used a small fraction of it at the Battle of the Blackwater, lighting the river green and saving the city from Stannis. But Cersei knew exactly where the rest of it was hidden. She knew precisely what it could do, and she understood that the weapon her father had refused to use, the weapon her brother had used sparingly, was the only tool left that could solve every single one of her problems at once. On the morning of Margaery Tyrell's trial, the great Sept of Baelor was filled to overflowing. The faithful packed the aisles. The nobility of the Reach occupied the front rows. The Tyrell family sat in the seats of honour. The High Sparrow presided from the altar. Lancel Lannister stood among the Sparrows. Kevan Lannister, the only competent hand her family had left, was there to keep the peace. In Cersei's mind, every single person within those walls was a traitor, an enemy, an obstacle to her survival. They had all humiliated her. They had all taken her children. They had all failed to see that she was willing to burn the world to keep what was hers. The signal was given. The pyromancers in the tunnels beneath the city did their work, and the ground shook. It was not an explosion that sounded like thunder. It was a roar that felt like the world splitting open. A column of green flame erupted from the earth where the Sept had stood, climbing high into the sky. A sickly, beautiful beacon visible from every corner of the city. The massive dome of the Sept shattered instantly, the stones thrown outward like pebbles. The walls melted in the heat. The stained glass windows, the painted images of the Seven, vaporized into nothing. In a single instant, the religious heart of King's Landing was gone. The High Sparrow, who had held the kingdom hostage with faith and fear, was reduced to ash. Margaery Tyrell, the brilliant political strategist who had outmaneuvered everyone except raw desperation, was gone. Her brother Loras, the Knight of Flowers, the perfect knight of song and story, was gone. Mace Tyrell, the Lord of Highgarden and the man who fed the realm, was gone. A dozen other lords and ladies, the backbone of the wealthiest region in all of Westeros, were dead. The power of the Reach evaporated in a single terrible instant. King Tommen Baratheon never stood a chance against a world like this. He was a gentle boy, the only child Cersei had, who seemed to have inherited none of her cruelty or her father's ambition. He loved his wife, Margaery, more than he loved the crown. He loved his kitten and his tomes and the idea of justice. He watched the green glow from his window in Maegor's holdfast. He felt the heat on his face through the glass. He saw the tower where his wife was held collapse into that column of emerald fire. The weight of the crown, the horror of his mother's actions, the destruction of everything he loved. It broke him completely. He removed the crown from his head, heavy and cold. He placed it on the table, a symbol of a legacy he could no longer bear. He walked quietly to the window. The fall was not a cry for help. It was a quiet surrender to a grief beyond his capacity to endure. The last legitimate Baratheon king, the final son of Cersei, who held any kindness in his heart, lay dead on the cobblestones of the Red Keep. Joffrey had been a monster. Tommen had been a lamb. Both were sacrificed on the same jagged altar of politics. And now the Iron Throne sat completely empty. There were no Targaryens in power in King's Landing. There were no Baratheons left to claim the crown. The line that had held the throne for nearly 3 decades following the rebellion was extinct. The bloodline that had held it for 300 years before that was scattered across the sea or buried beneath the dragon pit. The throne was sitting in the great hall, waiting, a monument of swords with no one left to cut. It waited for someone bold enough or desperate enough to simply sit down and claim it. In the immediate aftermath of the explosion, Cersei Lannister achieved what women had schemed and bled for since the days of the Conqueror. She walked into the throne room, past the Kingsguard, who had no orders to stop her, past the servants who were too terrified to breathe, and she sat herself on the Iron Throne, not as a regent, not as a queen consort, not as the mother of a dead king. She crowned herself Queen Regnant of the 7 Kingdoms. There was no great council to approve her claim. No maester declared her line of succession valid by any law of inheritance. She simply sat down, placed the crown upon her head, and dared anyone in the world to challenge her. It was the purest expression of the throne's original promise. Rule through conquest, rule through terror. Aegon the Conqueror forged the throne from the swords of his enemies. Cersei Lannister forged her claim from wildfire and the blackened corpses of the most powerful families in the realm. She became the Queen of Ashes, ruling a city that smelled of smoke and death. She held the Red Keep. She held the mountain as her personal executioner, a silent armoured horror at her side. She held the treasury that the Tyrell gold had once filled, now rapidly emptying, but she held nothing else. The Reach was now hostile, its lords leaderless and furious. The North had declared independence and sworn itself to a Stark king who was already marching south. The Riverlands were burned and broken. The Iron Islands raided any coast they could reach. Dawn watched and waited for the opportunity to strike, and winter had come in full force, snow falling on the capital for the first time in living memory. She sat on that jagged throne, and it was as uncomfortable as the legend had always claimed. But comfort was a luxury she had sacrificed long ago. Survival was all that mattered, and she knew, deep in her bones, that a storm was coming from the east that she could not buy off, or burn away, or bluff her way out of. Across the narrow sea, the heir to the very dynasty that had built the Iron Throne was finally ready to claim it. Daenerys Targaryen had waited through years of exile, through walks in the Red Waste, through the betrayal of those she trusted. She had marched through the great cities of Essos. She had broken the chains of slaves by the hundreds of thousands. She had gathered armies that no living person had seen assembled since the doom of Valyria. Unsullied spearmen, disciplined and unbreakable, standing in perfect bronze formation. Dothraki screamers, the vast horde of the Great Grass Sea, crossing the water for the first time in their history, under the leadership of her blood riders. and dragons. For the first time since the Dance of the Dragons tore the Targaryen line apart, living dragons were crossing the ocean to Westeros. Drogon, Rhaegar and Viserion, growing into the monsters of legend, their wings casting shadows over the waves. The Targaryen banners, the red three-headed dragon on a black field, were unfurled on the masts of her flagship. She was coming to break the wheel of noble power that had ground the common people into dust for generations. She was coming to take what was hers by birthright and conquest. She brought fire with her, not the green wildfire of the Mad King's pyromancers, not the creeping flame of Cersei's desperation. She brought the true fire of the Targaryen dynasty, the fire of Aegon the Conqueror, who had shaped the 7 swords of his enemies into the throne she sought. The fire of old Valyria, the source of the only power that could truly melt steel and bone. And as her armada sailed westward, she had no way of knowing the truth of the kingdom she was sailing toward. The throne she was coming to claim now sat upon a foundation of ash, guarded by a queen who had already burned her own people to keep it. The dragons were coming home, but the home they were flying toward was hollow, broken, rotting from the inside, and burning at the edges. The war for the Iron Throne was not over. It had simply entered its final, most terrible phase. Tommen Baratheon had stepped from a window in the Red Keep, leaving the Iron Throne completely, impossibly vacant. Cersei Lannister, seated upon its metal edges, had finally won the Game of Thrones in King's Landing, a city of ash, a throne of ghosts. But history does not stop for victory. It simply sets the stage for the next claimant. Up in the north, the true war had been fought. The living had won against the army of the dead, but the cost was immense. Jon Snow, the man who had united the wildlings and the northern houses, the man who had bent the knee to Daenerys Targaryen, had revealed his secret. He was Aegon Targaryen, the true heir to the Iron Throne. Daenerys Targaryen had come to Westeros to break the wheel, to free the people from tyrants. She had lost a dragon, she had lost her closest friend, Jorah Mormont, and she had lost the trust of those around her. Her claim to the throne was suddenly uncertain, and she was a conqueror. She did not know how to rule what she did not conquer. The combined armies of the North and Daenerys' forces marched south on King's Landing. The Lannister forces were beaten, but the city was surrounded. The bells of surrender began to toll. The war was over, and then Daenerys Targaryen chose. She chose fire and blood. With Drogon, she ignored the surrender. She ignored the bells. She unleashed a devastating assault on King's Landing, reducing the city to ash. This was not a military victory. This was an extermination. Tens of thousands of innocent men, women and children were burned alive in the streets. The Red Keep loomed over the inferno, its white stone turning black with soot and blood. The conqueror had become the tyrant she swore to destroy. In the depths of the Red Keep, Cersei Lannister watched her world burn. She had always believed her cunning and cruelty would protect her, but there is no cunning against dragonfire, no cruelty that matches ash raining from the sky. The Red Keep itself began to crumble, the ancient fortress groaning under the assault. Cersei ran, not for the throne, but for her twin, her lover, Jaime Lannister. They found each other in the crypts, and as the ceiling collapsed above them, they held each other. Cersei Lannister died not as the Queen of the Seven Kingdoms, but as a terrified woman in the arms of the man she had loved her entire life. Crushed beneath the collapsing ruins of the Red Keep, Daenerys Targaryen stood before her army, the red and black banners of House Targaryen flying over the burned city. She declared that she had not come to make a world for the powerful, but for the innocent. The irony was lost on no one save perhaps herself. She had won. The Iron Throne was hers. Jon Snow had bent the knee out of love, out of duty to save the world. He had watched her burn a city. He knew what she would do next. She would not stop at Westeros. The phrase "liberate the entire world" was not a promise. It was a threat. He went to her in the throne room. The Red Keep was a ruin around them, dust still floating in the air. Daenerys touched the Iron Throne, her hand tracing the cold, sharp swords. She spoke of her destiny of breaking the wheel. Jon tried to reason with her, but she was gone. The queen he loved had died alongside the girl she used to be in the fields of ash outside. Jon Snow, the man who loved her, the man who believed in honor, did the only thing he could do to prevent further global conquest. He plunged a dagger into her heart. Daenerys Targaryen died in the arms of her lover, just as Cersei had. The Dragon Queen, the breaker of chains, the mother of dragons was gone. The cycle of Targaryen rule had ended not with a bang, but with a single silent, honest betrayal. Drogon, the last dragon, sensed her death. He arrived in the throne room, the massive beast lowering his head to nuzzle his mother's body. He roared, a sound that shook the very foundations of the destroyed keep. But Drogon did not kill Jon Snow. The dragon, wild and intelligent, seemed to understand something. It was not Jon who had killed his mother. It was the throne. It was the seat of absolute power. Drogon turned his gaze upon the Iron Throne. The enormous dais, the 1,000 twisted blades, the jagged seat that Aegon the Conqueror had forged with dragonfire centuries ago. The Dragan breathed his fire upon it, the mother of all fires. The steel of 1,000 enemies turned red, then white, then liquid. The swords began to drip like candle wax, pooling at the base of the dais. The symbol of absolute power melted back into a shapeless pool of steel. The Iron Throne, the object that had driven men and women to madness, the symbol of the Targaryen dynasty and every war fought in its name, was gone. It had been unmade by the very fire that had made it. It was no longer a throne. It was a puddle of slag in a crumbling ruin. Aegon the Conqueror made it to remind Westeros that the Targaryens ruled through power. But power is a strange thing. It leaves traces. In the end, the throne that took 300 years to build its legend took only a single breath of fire to destroy. All that remained was the twisted metal, cooling in the ash,